Chapter 81. Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yun. Faced with Fang Mafei and Lao Mei's confusion, he did not bother to explain and went straight into the secret chamber. Emmy, I need to break through to the third peak in the shortest time possible. Mystique Wind Conjuration also needs to break through to the fourth stage. Aya, with Dongxuan's army pressing on the border and Yutang's survival on the line, Yun Yang finally decided to temporarily put aside his grudges and personal matters to focus on his cultivation. What Yun Yang wanted to cultivate now was Supreme Wind's Mystique Wind Conjuration. There was also Seventh Brother Supreme Blood's Art of Crimson Fiend. He only needed to cultivate the first stage and go to the residence of 9 Supremes to open 7th Brother Supreme Blood's room to retrieve 6th Brother's Thunder Crash Conjuration. After cultivating the first stage, he would find 5th Brother's Fiery Charm and continue cultivating. The time was very short. However, Yun Yang had to do it. The only thing that could help the army now was the combination of wind and flame. It would be best if Thunder Crash Conjuration could be cultivated to the 3rd or 4th stage. However, Yun Yang guessed that he might not be able to do it even if he risked his life. There was not enough time to cultivate the 3rd or 4th stage of Fiery Charm. However, Yun Yang had to do it even if he had to risk his life. Brothers, you have protected this country for so long, you must not lose the honor of the 9 Supremes in my hands. 5th Brother Fire, how nice would it be if you were my 7th or 8th brother? I can only get 7th Brother's key when I open 8th Brother's. I can only get 6th Brother's key when I open 6th Brother's. I can only get your key when I open 6th Brother's, Yun Yang mumbled in his heart. If Supreme Flame was still here, Yun Yang would definitely not be able to escape this beating. This child actually wants to demote me? Disappearing for 10 days out of the blue and coming back to cultivate in seclusion? Fang Mafei was puzzled. Is this something to be surprised about? Lao Mei rolled his eyes. Disappearing for 3 months out of the blue and coming back to cultivate in seclusion for 3 months, have you seen this before? Fang Mafei was shocked. There's actually such a thing. Lao Mei rolled his eyes and said earnestly, Old Fang, there are so many strange things, abnormal things, unimaginable things, and crazy things happening to our young master. You've just arrived, you need to get used to it. Go, clean up the courtyard. Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei's departing silhouette and scratched his head in confusion. In such a large marquise mansion, there's so much money to spend. Hiring a maid and a servant. Will it kill you, what a lunatic. Making me, a 7th celestial layer expert, sweep the yard. Tiantang City fell into silence as everyone waited for news from the front lines. Victory or defeat. News spread like snowflakes. On the 4th of June, the war at the Fortress of Resilience began. Dongxuan's soldiers crossed the border. On the 14th of June, the Fortress of Resilience fell. On the 15th of the 6th month, Tai Zhang's army struck. On the 21st day of the 6th month, Tai Zhang's vanguard entered the battlefield, sweeping everything in their path and forcing the enemy to retreat back to the Fortress of Resilience. The nation was in jubilation when the news spread. On the 23rd of the 6th month, Tai Zhang's army fought with all their might for 2 days to recapture the Fortress of Resilience and faced off against 2 enemy troops outside the fort. On the 3rd of the 7th month, Dongxian launched an all-out attack. Outside the Fortress of Resilience, the Shadow Cavalry was mobilized while Tai Zhang sent 20,000 steel cavalry to fight. The battle lasted until the 5th of the 6th month, when all 20,000 steel cavalry were killed. Of the 30,000 Dongxian Shadow Knights, less than 2,000 had survived. The whole country was in an uproar. On the 4th day of the 7th month, 200,000 Empire of Dongxian reinforcements arrived at the battlefield. The front line was in dire straits. On the 5th of the 7th month, Yutang sent out the last batch of reinforcements. For the time being, this was the last batch of troops that could support the battlefield. They would not be able to do so for at least 2 months. The nation was silent. A sense of sorrow and despair began to spread throughout Yutang's borders. Little Nan Nan carried Big Whitey and opened the door of her house. Her curious and pure gaze looked at the uncles in front of her. All of them were so clean and nimble today. What were they doing? Wan walked out of her room in shock. Brother Li, Brother Lu, Brother Fong, Brother Meng. What's going on? Come, tell your sister-in-law. A middle-aged man with 3 scars on his face and a blind eye wore an honest smile. We are going to enlist in the military. Enlist in the military? Wan asked in surprise, didn't all of you retire due to your injuries? Looking at these people, who were either blind or had lost an arm, they were actually wearing their old military uniforms again. A faint valiant aura exuded from these people once again. Retired due to injuries. We've only injured our eyes and lost our arms. We still have our legs, at the very least, we still have a hand. Brother Li smiled honestly. Now that the country is in danger and it's a matter of life and death, we have to go to the battlefield if we can still fight. Otherwise, when Dongxuan's army comes, it will be our humiliation. Although we've taken off our military uniforms, we're still soldiers. Since we're Yutang soldiers, of course, we have to fight for this country. So many families of our fallen brothers are in this country. Our lives were exchanged for by our fallen brothers. Now that the front line is in danger, we have to go. We have to return what we owe to our brothers. Don't call us cowards when we meet underground one day. Heh. We're here to bid farewell to sister-in-law, to inform you that the possibility of us coming back is extremely slim. If sister-in-law needs any help, look for old cripple and the rest in the future. They're crippled and can't run, so they won't be going this time. Another young man who had lost his left arm chuckled and said, there's one more thing that I'd like to ask sister-in-law for. You know, there aren't many in our family who can read, there's no one to teach our children. If sister-in-law has the time, teach them more, don't go down the wrong path. When they grow up, let them go to the battlefield and avenge us. Yes, Wan, please put in more effort in the future. The few of them bowed at the same time. A veteran blinked with his remaining eye and smiled honestly. I haven't done much in the few years I've been back, but I've given birth to a few children. Our generation is gone, but when the children grow up, my family can have at least 3 children. 2 each, and I've managed to get my share. Nonsense, why don't you hope that the children can make contributions and become generals? A veteran beside him slapped his head. I'm afraid they don't have this fate. The veteran chuckled. Wan looked at these people and felt her eyes burning. I'll send you off. Eat at home tonight, I'll go buy some wine. No. The few of them smiled honestly. Tonight, we'll eat at our own homes. We'll leave early tomorrow morning. Tonight, we still have to talk to the wives and children. As he spoke, he handed over a bundle. You orphans and widows, your lives are harder than ours. This is a few taels of silver that we've pooled together. When we're not here anymore, use this to buy some floral cloth for darling, make some clothes, eat some good food, and find a good husband. Hee. Amidst the simple and honest laughter, the dozen of them turned and left. Wan looked at the backs of these veterans, her vision blurred by tears. You'll definitely come back safely. She had once resented the army for taking her husband away and never coming back. But now, looking at these veterans, she suddenly understood something. Perhaps, in the hearts of these hot-blooded men, there was no such thing as hegemony in the world. But to protect their homes, to protect their country, to protect everything they cared about, they were duty-bound. Just as they said, the families of so many brothers who died in the war are still alive in this country. Our lives were originally exchanged with the lives of our brothers who died in the war. This time, we'll return it to them. We'll return it to them, lest we meet underground one day and they call us cowards. Hee. Wan-er's tears flowed uncontrollably as she thought of this. Darling opened her bright eyes. Mother, what are the uncles going to do? Will they ignore Darling in the future? No, they won't. Wan-er's tears flowed like a fountain. The uncles will protect you forever. Chen San stood in front of the residence of Yun in his military uniform. Lao Mei opened the door. Sir Butler, is the young master in? Lao Mei shook his head. No. Chen San's expression was one of regret as he smiled sheepishly and said, I wanted to bid farewell to the young master in person. I'm afraid I won't be able to repay young master's kindness in this lifetime. Lao Mei frowned. What's wrong? I'm going to the battlefield. Chen San smiled sheepishly. Many brothers are going too. The front line is said to be very dangerous. After all, we've killed enemies and seen blood. There's nothing to be afraid of. We'll go again. Now that the 9 sirs are gone, Yutong is in danger. We still have our hands and legs. We can still fight. We're going. After that, he knelt down and kowtowed 3 times at the residence of Yun's door. Chen San will repay young master's kindness in my next life. He turned to leave. Lao Mei felt something choking in his throat. Chen San. Sir Butler, what are your orders? Lao Mei took out 2 gold ingots and stuffed them into Chen San's arms. Take this back to your wife. Don't reject it, it means you're looking down on young master. Do your best. Chen San, come back alive. The entire Tiantang city, the entire empire of Yutong, was filled with such scenes. Dawn of the 2nd day. The remaining soldiers walked out from the alleys and from the dilapidated houses, quietly and neatly lining up on the streets. Before the sun had risen, almost all of them had assembled. With a soft command, as if he was afraid of waking up his wife and child who were still sleeping, he quietly began to walk towards the city gate. Some of them were missing their left hand, some of them were missing their right hand. Their gait looked odd, as if they were not neat at all. However, just looking at their legs, the frequency of their gait was exactly the same. They held the weapons that they had used to fight on the battlefield, their faces solemn as they walked out in a relaxed manner. There were already many people gathered outside the city gate. Countless veterans with broken legs were left out of this operation, but they did not sleep for the entire night. They had come out of the city early to send their brothers off. This was a crippled army, no one was not injured, no one was not crippled. Many of the crippled generals wore shiny armor and rode on their horses, watching their brothers gather from all directions like rivers flowing into the sea. Slowly, the number of people increased. Let's send off our brothers. Jars of wine were placed on the ground. Countless veterans with broken legs straightened their upper bodies at the same time. All the remaining soldiers bowed to the ground at the same time. Brothers, please take care of the family. There was no departure ceremony, no gongs and drums to send them off. Brothers, depart. Someone called out hoarsely. A huge flag unfurled with a flapping sound. Battle in the mountains in my dreams, even with my broken body, I can repay the nation's kindness. The army departed in silence. There were tens of thousands of them. Their steps were firm, not a single one of them turned back. Don't turn back. If we can come back alive from this war, we can look at it however we want. If we can't, we'll feel even worse when we turn back. The morning breeze whistled through Tiantang City. They went further and further away. It was only then that the silhouettes of countless women and children dared to show themselves. They had been here, covering their mouths as they watched their children, their men, go to war once again. Tears streamed down their cheeks soundlessly. This chaotic era, these days of war, when would it end? Suddenly, the sound of galloping hooves could be heard. 2 swift horses charged out of the city gate like lightning. On the horses were 2 old generals, Yutong's 2 gods of war. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin. Looking at the departing army, the 2 old generals stood for a long time with hot tears in their eyes. They are all heroes. It's just that we have mistreated our heroes. Chapter 82. Tiantang City seemed to be emptier than before. It seemed to have lost its former prosperity as well. Even the chatter in the restaurants had lessened. Everyone was living in silence, quietly paying attention to the news from the front lines. But, in a certain dark place, the gangsters who had wreaked havoc in the villages were dying in batches for some unknown reason. Many of them seemed to have been killed by mystical beasts, but there were also many who had died by swords and sabers. The military spies had almost all been released by the old marshal. Previously, the old marshal's high status and authority had not been noticed, but this time around, he had hardened his heart. Anyone who bullies the families of the deployed generals, those who bullies the families of the fallen generals, those who bullies the families of the disabled generals, kill without mercy. When the old marshal had issued this order, his eyes had been bloodshot. At the same time, His Majesty's secret guards and old General Leng Daoyin's trusted subordinates were also doing the same. Yutong's punishment had also been reformulated to target this aspect. Severe punishment. Therefore, the empire of Yutong's gangsters were in deep trouble. If they went out to collect some protection fees, their heads might just fly away. This was going to be an extremely brutal tug-of-war. As for Han Sanhe's Dongxian Shadow Cavalry, they had always prided themselves as the strongest troop in the world. Encountering such a strong opponent as the Steel Cavalry, they would definitely retaliate fiercely. It was difficult to judge who would emerge victorious in this battle. Reinforcements were being deployed continuously, but all of the empire's higher-ups knew that only Tai Zhang's 100,000-strong army could decide the outcome of the battle. That was the real, and also the strongest power that he could bring out at the current stage. If the 9 Supremes Lords were still here. Countless Yutong citizens were thinking silently. If the 9 Supremes Lords were still here, Dongxuan's Shadow Cavalry would not have dared to let them out. Then, how could such a precarious situation happen? It had gradually become a trend in the empire of Yutong. Whether it was restaurants, taverns, inns or shops, there was no one who did not sigh at the mention of this matter. If the 9 Supremes were still here, would the Shadow Cavalry dare come? If the 9 Supremes were still here, even Han Sanhe wouldn't dare make a move. If the 9 Supremes were still here, that would be great. The Fortress of Resilience seems to be not far from Tianxian Cliff where the 9 Sirs perished. Someone looked despondent. I really want to pay my respects to the 9 Sirs. What do you mean not far? Are you confused? Tianxian Cliff is behind the Fortress of Resilience, in our country. The 9 lords were killed in the country? How is that possible? Sigh, on the 15th of July. Dongxuan's 200,000 troops fall into formation and wage the final battle against my general Tai Zhang. The battle is currently at a stalemate. Both sides have close to 500,000 soldiers fighting within 3,000 miles of the Fortress of Resilience. There's no clear victor. But our army suffered heavy casualties. The news from the front lines flew in like pieces of paper. The mood of Yutong's people grew heavier as well. Everyone's heart was in their throats. The war continued to drag on. It was the 45th day of Tai Zhang's army's expedition. Yin Yang walked out of his closed-door cultivation. Now, the front line was close to collapse. After Yin Yang came out, he headed east alone without a second word. A gust of wind rose in the sky. A white cloud soared into the sky, and under the urging of the rapid wind, it slowly flew away. The wind in Tiantang city grew stronger. Swoosh, 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 the old marshal looked up at Tiantang Square, at the Tiantang dragon flag that fluttered in the wind. He did not speak for a long time. This feeling was so familiar. Once upon a time, when the wind blew, the clouds surged. When the clouds surged, the thunder rumbled. When the thunder rumbled, the earth dragon soared, the golden gleam shone, the waves rose, the wood shot into the sky, the fire blazed, and blood filled the sky. Now, the wind was blowing again. It's a pity that the might of the 9 Supremes can hardly be seen again. The old marshal sighed with his arms behind his back, his expression bleak. In front of the Fortress of Resilience, the sounds of battle shook the heavens. As the two armies fought, the arrows above their heads were like a thunderstorm, almost never stopping. It was not hundreds or thousands of people, but tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting. Swoosh! An arrow grazed past Tai Zhang's face. Tai Zhang's expression was stoic, his eyelids did not even blink. He stood at a high point, wearing a shiny golden cloak and holding a 25 feet long spear. Beneath him was an extremely handsome wind-seeker crimson flame colt that was 5 feet long. He wore a golden helmet on his head and a long sword hung on his waist. He stood high up on his horse, looking at the battlefield coldly. As the marshal of the three armies, he knew that he should be in the marshal's tent. However, facing the frenzied attack of Han Sanha's Dongxian troop, he could only stand here. He did not budge, dressed in the most eye-catching attire. He wanted all the soldiers who were fighting to see their marshal standing there like a majestic mountain as long as they turned their heads. He was still standing there. Even if the sky were to fall, their marshal would still be there. Tens of thousands of soldiers were fighting in front of the two armies. Right in front of them was an awe-inspiring cavalry. From the men to the horses, they were all black. Even in the battlefield that was filled with the sounds of battle, this troop was still as quiet as a block of ice on a high mountain. Even the horses were quiet. There was a formless oppressive air about them. It was the calmness of those who had gone through life and death. They did not take the battle before them seriously at all. In their eyes, there was no life or death, victory or defeat, only massacre. There was a similar troop of cavalry in Yutong's army, their attire almost identical. The only difference between the Shadow Cavalry and the Steel Cavalry was that the Shadow Cavalry wore black clothes, black armor, black horses, black helmets, and black robes. As for the Steel Cavalry, they only had a steel mask on top of the same attire. Only on this steel mask was there an emblem that could only be recognized by their own people. Both sides glared at each other, there was nothing else in their eyes. All the life and death on the battlefield did not matter to them at this moment. Tai Zheng stood proudly, his eyes brimming with murderous intent, his composure unwavering. He was like a reef in the midst of a raging storm, observing everything on the battlefield coldly as he calmly deployed his troops, maximizing the effect of each troop in his hands. Each time a new troop entered the battlefield, it was always at the enemy's weakest point. However, the enemy's immediate response often made him uncomfortable. Every one of his gestures was resolute and decisive, and his posture was filled with elegance and confidence. Each of the generals around him looked at him with reverence and fervor, executing his orders meticulously. They knew very well that not every troop could have such a marshal. Not every marshal could be so flawless. The marshal's calmness and steadiness were the reassurance of the troops. As long as such a marshal is here, we will not lose. Tai Zheng's expression was calm, but his heart was already frying. He knew that he could not hold on much longer. However, the enemy had yet to unleash his lethal attack. Han Sanha had not made a move since the beginning. It was only the three generals under Tai Zheng's command who were engaged in battle. Even the 20,000 shadow cavalry in front of him was not Han Sanha's lethal attack. He must have something else up his sleeve. But where was his next move? Tai Zheng's expression was calm but his mind was racing. If the battle went on like this, it would only be a battle of attrition. However, he could not afford to do so. Tai Zheng knew very well that all of his reinforcements had arrived. The nation would not give him any more support from now on. In spite of this, the enemy's reinforcements were endless. Behind him was the Fortress of Resilience. If the Fortress of Resilience had never been breached and he defended the fort, he was confident that he could repel Han Sanha outside the fort even if he attacked with the entire nation's strength. At the very least, he could perish together with the enemy. However, the enemy had breached the Fortress of Resilience and destroyed it completely. When he led his army over, the enemy had retreated out of the Fortress of Resilience immediately. Under such circumstances, Tai Zheng would never dare defend the Fortress of Resilience even if he was filled with courage. He could only confront the enemy on a field outside the Fortress of Resilience. Who knew what malicious setup the enemy had made after breaching the Fortress of Resilience? Even if there was no setup, the walls of the Fortress of Resilience had collapsed. How could he even defend the fort? The enemy had come to attack, but he had forced himself into the same situation as the enemy. There were 30,000 steel cavalry behind Tai Zheng. From the beginning to the end, no matter how dangerous the situation was, he had not mobilized these 30,000 steel cavalry. They would eat the best food and stay the best accommodation. If the battle were to deteriorate, these 30,000 steel cavalry would be his last trump card. Woo woo, the dull sound of a horn rang in the enemy's camp. A black torrent slowly moved, from slow to fast, gradually forming a sharp whistling sound. The uniform galloping was like a bell ringing one's soul. The moment the enemy's horn rang, Tai Zheng waved his hand without hesitation. The war drums sounded at the same time. 5,000 steel cavalry moved in unison behind the military formation. On the battlefield, both troops were like raging black dragons, galloping silently towards each other. Not a single person from the two armies let out a hoarse roar like that. Not even a grunt could be heard. They charged forward in silence, their eyes filled with a frenzied will to fight and a reckless murderous intent. The two troops of cavalry that were like raging dragons collided with a loud bang amidst the silence. At that moment, Tai Zheng, who was on one side, and Dongxuan's general who was watching the battle from a high vantage point narrowed their eyes. Waves of blood rose into the air. Elite against elite. The shadow cavalry was expressionless, ignoring their comrades who fell off their steeds one after another. They held their weapons in their hands, attacking and charging forward in a frenzy. Every member of the steel cavalry wore an iron mask and remained silent as well. This was a battlefield. Everything was decided by weapons. Life and death were the deciding factor. Swoosh, swoosh, the leader of Yutong's steel cavalry was Wu Jundao, the assistant commander of the steel cavalry. The steel spear in his hand shot out like raindrops, glimmering like stars as black silhouettes were picked up and dropped. His warhorse did not stop for a moment as he led his subordinates, charging into the enemy's base like a sharp knife. The enemy followed the same strategy, charging straight into the steel cavalry's camp. Other than the sound of weapons clashing, everything was silent. Both sides were advancing. Both sides were dying. Bang! Chapter 83. All the soldiers who had fallen off their horses were turned into minced meat in an instant. Streaks of blood splashed and splattered. Watching from afar, one could see that after the two cavalries collided, the arms of the cavalries were detached from their bodies and flew into the air. Heads kept spinning in the air like frogs jumping out of the water before falling to the ground. There were constantly flying bodies that flew up, splattered with blood, and then fell to the ground. Wu Jundao charged forward with all his might. Suddenly, he felt his body relax, the pressure was gone. His eyes were wide open as he charged out of the enemy's cavalry formation. Behind him, the steel cavalry that was still organized charged out at the same time. Wu Jundao raised his spear diagonally, his warhorse galloped and made a circle, aiming at the enemy's cavalry formation again. Without a word, he charged forward once more. Life and death depended on this moment. Victory or defeat depended on this moment as well. High above, Tai Zheng raised his arm abruptly and hollered, "Yutong's steel cavalry." His voice was like rumbling thunder that swept across the battlefield. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers roared at the same time, unrivaled in the world. This was the first time the steel cavalry had made a sound since the battle began. It was under their marshal's lead. Drumbeats reverberated from the enemy's formation at the same time. A cruel smile hung on Tai Zheng's face. He was just a tad faster. The marshal's deafening roar was undoubtedly a boost to the soldiers' morale. Yutong's steel cavalry went into a frenzy as they roared at the same time, Yutong's steel cavalry. Unrivaled in the world. They charged towards Dongxuan's shadow cavalry. In the enemy's camp, the general who was commanding the troops wore a grim expression, sweat dripping from the tip of his nose. A lean elder stood with his arms behind his back as he watched the battlefield and said faintly, "The shadow cavalry has lost this battle. Sound the gongs to retreat." "Marshal." The general was indignant. "A defeat is a defeat." The lean elder said coldly, "Sound the gongs to retreat." "Yes." The enemy's formation was retreating, but the two cavalries that were entangled did not separate so easily. They were still biting and killing each other as they broke through the enemy's formation and returned to their own. The ground was littered with bloodied corpses. Do you know why you lost? The old man's eyes were filled with wisdom. I was too slow. The general lowered his head in shame. Not bad. The scrawny elder was Dongxuan's god of war, Han Sanhe. Our shadow cavalry is basically the same as the enemy's steel cavalry, the most elite combat force. Both sides will suffer and perish together. However, your command failed. In this battle, our side had sent out 5,000 cavalrymen, while the other side had also sent out 5,000. The other side had returned with 3,000 to 4,000 men, but the number of our brothers who returned was at least 500 less than the other side. Why is that? When they broke through the formation and regrouped, Tai Zheng seized the opportunity. His roar spurred the army to cheer. This was the morale. At that point in time, the cavalries of both sides are already like arrows at the end of their flight. The only thing that can support them is their morale. The side with the highest morale would win. On the other hand, the enemy made the first move. Their cavalry's morale soared, and we were a step behind, so our morale was suppressed. In the first wave, the number of casualties on both sides was similar. The hundreds of casualties on our side only happened after the second wave of morale was suppressed. You're not Tai Zheng's opponent. The scrawny elder said faintly, there's another reason for your defeat. Tai Zheng was always standing there, his soldiers could see him. As for you, your soldiers couldn't see you. The general is the soldier's courage. The general's courage is the soul of an army. Therefore, your defeat in this battle is well deserved. Han Sanhe sighed softly. Tai Zheng is indeed a generational talent. The general beside him was already ashamed. After this battle, the shadow cavalry can't enter the battlefield for a short period of time. Their morale has been suppressed. We have to find a chance to turn the tables before we can continue fighting. Otherwise, when we face the steel cavalry again, the enemy's psychological advantage is already formed. It's bound to be a great defeat. For 45 consecutive days, the three of you have taken turns to fight Tai Zheng. Out of the three of you, half of you have lost. Han Sanhe narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at the battlefield. It looks like this old man will have to fight personally. This lowly general is ashamed. I'm willing to lead the army. This isn't military law. This battle is meant to train the soldiers. Han Sanhe said coldly, the three of you have been fighting openly and covertly within the nation, fighting for the title of the top general of the younger generation. This battle is to let you see how far you're from being a famed general. I hope you remember the countless heroic souls that have died because of your mistakes in this battle. Han Sanhe looked at the general and the other two generals who were standing straight as he said word by word, this time, we're using human lives to train the soldiers for you. I want you to remember that in front of a true famed general, you're not even worth a fart. If you don't improve, it's only a matter of time before you die on this battlefield. Han Sanhe's voice was cold. The three generals were flushed, lowering their heads as if they were about to crawl into a hole in the ground. This is what it means to build a general's success on the bones of thousands. Han Sanhe went up to the podium with a grim expression. A huge flag suddenly flew up in the wind from Dongxuan's camp. It fluttered wildly in the air. Han! The entire Dongxian army, hundreds of thousands of men, howled loudly. The soldiers cheered in unison, their voices shaking the air. On the other side, Tai Zheng's expression froze. Han Sanhe was finally going to fight personally. He had raised the flag specifically to tell him that he had already seen him as an opponent who could threaten him. I will fight with all my might. This was Han Sanhe's respect for his opponent. However, this respect made Tai Zheng's heart skip a beat. He would rather Han Sanhe underestimate him and look down on him than face him in such a serious manner. The pressure was immense. Orders came continuously from the enemy's camp. The battle on the battlefield was forcefully stopped by the enemy as all the combatants returned to their ranks. The flags fluttered, blanketing the sky and earth. The wind howled as the flags fluttered like dragons within 100 miles. Han Sanhe had only reorganized his troops, but the entire Dongxian army took on a different atmosphere at once. Whether it was their aura, their will to fight, or their murderous intent, they seemed to have been elevated by several levels at once. This was the invincible confidence that an unparalleled general of his generation had brought to his troops. The soldiers' instinctive fear of the battlefield was completely erased from their hearts when Han Sanhe personally commanded them. Tai Zheng sucked in a deep breath in the face of the overwhelming aura and gave the order at the same time. The entire army retreated to defend. Although he knew that such a decision would put him at a disadvantage, Tai Zheng could only do so in the face of such an overwhelming aura. If they were to fight now, their defeat would be certain. The enemy's aura was blazing. It was only an appearance without any order to attack, but it had already forced Tai Zheng to change his formation, to switch from offense to defense. There was no pride on Han Sanhe's face, only calmly and methodically issuing his orders. Countless troops began to move from all directions, attacking Yutong's Yutong troop in a chaotic but orderly manner. They came and went, advancing and retreating, coming from the east and west, fighting from the north and south. Tai Zheng utilized his brain's calculation ability to its maximum, countering every move that came his way and fighting back. Arrows. Time passed by slowly. Although Tai Zheng was still as calm as ever, he was already powerless. For 3 consecutive days, Han Sanhe had been attacking continuously, using all sorts of methods from all directions: sneak attacks, ambushes, fire attacks. It was a comprehensive collection of tactics. Nibbling tactics. This was the nibbling tactics that Han Sanhe had used to strike fear into the hearts of the famed generals of various countries, nibbling away at your men bit by bit. No matter how you defended, I had my ways to bite you bit by bit. Tai Zheng's troops were forced to retreat again and again. However, after 3 days, he realized that the enemy had already completed half of the encirclement. Furthermore, all of the formidable military force was laid out in front of him. This was obviously the stance of a pursuit. Facing such a situation, all that was left was a head-on battle. In spite of this, Tai Zheng had no confidence in winning a head-on battle. If he lost, he could only retreat. However, once he did so, the 50,000 shadow cavalry that had not moved would come crashing in like a tsunami. By then, if he insisted on fleeing, Han Sanhe might take advantage of the situation and pursue him all the way to Tiantang City. The continent's god of war lives up to his reputation. Tai Zheng sighed deeply. His heart was helpless. Unknowingly, he had not even noticed how the enemy had set up the ambush, but the catastrophe had come so suddenly. There was nothing left out in all directions. Marshal. The soldier who was in charge of the lookout cried out in terror from the top of the mountain. What is it? Why are you panicking? Tai Zheng was furious. However, he was stunned as well. Behind him, a troop of cavalry had appeared out of nowhere. There were at least tens of thousands of people in the crowd. The Dongxian Steel Cavalry. Since when had they come to his back? Tai Zheng was utterly disheartened as he turned to look at the enemy's formation. Han Sanhe still did not show himself, but Tai Zheng knew that he was doomed. Han Sanhe's relentless attacks these few days were actually for this hidden pawn. Tens of thousands of cavalrymen were cutting off his retreat. While he was busy dealing with the enemy's simultaneous attacks from dozens of sides, this troop of cavalry had actually circled behind him. There was no way forward and no way back. Han Sanhe was obviously trying to strangle the empire of Yutong's military force. Now, the enemy was attacking from all sides and the tempo was picking up. It was obvious that the enemy's final attack was about to begin. Once the final attack began, it would be a thunderous one. Tai Zheng was trying his best to think of a way to escape this fate of certain defeat and death. If he were to be defeated, the empire of Yutong's eastern border would fall completely. However, even as he thought about it, his temples throbbing, He could not think of any countermeasure. Han Sanha's attacks were dense and omnipresent. It was impossible to defend against them. Marshal. The guard who was on the lookout suddenly cried out in delight, "Marshal, Dongxuan's troop is suddenly in chaos in the southwest. There seems to be a battle." Tai Zheng was stunned. Southwest? He had always wanted to break out from that direction and defend the mountain there, but Dong Xian had obviously seen this as well. The defense of the southwest was like an iron bucket. How could there be a battle there? Chapter 84. Tai Zheng turned to take a look. Thick smoke billowed into the sky. The sounds of battle could be heard clearly from dozens of miles away. It sounded like a large-scale battle was taking place. Tai Zheng could only feel his heart thumping in his chest, his lips slightly parched. "Give the order, signal the flag. Ask what's going on." However, before they could do anything, there were already 9 plumes of thick smoke billowing into the sky. There was no fire, no smoke. "Our men." Tai Zheng felt like his heart was about to leap out of his chest. Where did this reinforcement come from? Dongxuan's Han Sanha had noticed the commotion in the southwest as well. With a command, 10,000 cavalrymen charged over like an arrow. Charge. Tai Zheng was decisive. This was their only chance, their only way out of this predicament. Gather there, to Tianxian Cliff. Now, even if there were reinforcements, their defeat was already set in stone. What he could do was to build a new line of defense at Tianxian Cliff, using the terrain and the mountains to hold out for as long as he could. The great battle broke out without any warning at this moment. Tai Zheng took the field personally, leading the entire army to break through the encirclement towards the southwest. Han Sanha had not thought of this beforehand, and Tai Zheng had never expected to attack this direction either. Both sides were beyond their expectations. The brutality of this battle was even more beyond imagination. Yutong's steel cavalry. Tai Zheng roared and took the lead. The 30,000 steel cavalry that Tai Zheng had not used since the beginning moved together. They turned into a giant hammer and smashed over. Dongxuan's 50,000 shadow cavalry moved at the same time. The 30,000 shadow cavalry behind Yutong's army to cut off their retreat reacted a beat too late, only beginning to charge. Before this, no one had thought that there would be a loophole in the most unlikely place. Yutong's 200,000 men broke through the siege. Dongxian gathered their superior military strength to stop them. Han Sanha was stationed in the center of the troop, deploying his troops and issuing orders continuously. Tai Zheng, on the other hand, was charging towards them with bloodshot eyes, not changing his direction. Both sides had a clear goal. If these 200,000 men retreated to the west of Tianxian Cliff without any casualties, the Empire of Yutong could still retain its strength and fight. However, if they could keep these 200,000 soldiers here, the Empire of Yutong would suffer a great loss. Han Sanha had plotted this for so long, how could he let Tai Zheng escape? Tai Zheng took the lead, crushing all who stood in his way. His 25 feet long spear turned into countless shadows that exploded in the air. Everywhere he passed, there was absolutely no one who could withstand a single blow. His horse had already turned into a whirlwind as he led the 30,000 cavalrymen forward with an irresistible force. It was a stance of fighting for their lives. On the other side, some unknown troop was also rushing over with all their might to assist Tai Zheng in breaking out of the siege. The desperation on the other side was even greater than that on this side. The frenzied charge of Yutong's army brought the entire battle to its climax in an instant. Tai Zheng charged forward in a frenzy. Charge! Kill them all. This was their only chance. Where did this troop come from? Han Sanha's clear face was filled with doubt as well. He knew the Empire of Yutong's troop movements like the back of his hand. There was no longer any support for Tai Zheng. How could such a troop appear out of nowhere? Tai Zheng sprinted for dozens of miles and was finally close to the battlefield in front of him. However, the moment he saw the battlefield before him, his heart skipped a beat. His eyes were rimmed red as hot tears rolled down his cheeks. Kill them all. Regroup with the brothers. On the other side was a group of crippled soldiers wearing old military uniforms and armors. Whether it was the commanding officer or the soldiers, they were either blinded in one eye or had a broken arm. They were shouting in unison, fighting ferociously as they charged forward. Yutong is undefeated. Yutong is unrivaled. I am Yutong's man, I shall die fighting for the country. Save Marshal Tai. Brothers, it's time to fight for our lives. The crippled soldiers charged forward in a frenzy. They did not evade at all, exchanging their lives for their own. You slash me, I'll slash you back. I'm already crippled, I can't fight you. All I can do is fight for my life. An old soldier charged forward with a guffaw. 2 Dongxian soldiers slashed at him with their sabers. The old soldier did not evade, instead, his eyes widened as he roared, "Men are not here to fight. Men are here to fight for our lives." He welcomed the 2 sabers with his neck and chest while the sabers in his hands slashed down ferociously. Blood sprayed into the sky as 3 heads fell together. Another crippled soldier who was blinded in one eye jumped down from the high ground to face the sharp sabers and spears, pouncing forward. His body was pierced, but his saber had also chopped off a Dongxian soldier's head in a frenzy. "Marshal Tai, over here." The crippled soldiers roared as they charged forward with their lives on the line. "Our lives aren't worth anything anymore. We're just waiting for our deaths at the back." A crippled general cried out, "Marshal Tai. The Empire of Yutong can't do without you. We have no regrets dying in front of the 9 Supremes Lords Tianxian Cliff. We have no regrets following the 9 Supremes Lords." Tai Zheng's tears of blood flowed. "Kill them all. Kill them all. Don't let our brothers die in vain." He hollered madly. Right before the valley, he suddenly leaped down from his horse's back, charging towards the enemy's formation like a mad tiger. His spear rained down in a circular arc that gleamed coldly. Hundreds of Dongxian soldiers were killed with a single thrust of his spear. The gap had been opened. "Charge. I'll cover the retreat." Yutong's steel cavalry surged out from the gap. Tai Zheng had gone mad. When he saw the crippled soldiers, he had completely lost his rationality. These old brothers were using their lives to pave the way for the army. They did not have a unified commander. Although their numbers were considerable, they lacked coordination. They could only use such a barbaric and cruel method to realize their value in battle. "How can I, Tai Zheng, use my old brothers' lives to exchange for my own? I'll open this gap with all of you." Tai Zheng roared. When the 25 feet long spear was swung, not a single drop of water could enter within 100 feet radius. Since the marshal was covering the retreat, Yutong's troops knew that the opportunity could not be missed, galloping in along the path. When each of the generals saw their troops charging over, they returned immediately without exception to accompany Tai Zheng and cover the army's retreat. "I'll be the general. I'll fight to the death for my brothers. I'll be the general, I can't just use my brothers' lives to accumulate merit. I'll be the general." There were more and more Yutong generals following Tai Zheng, all of them looking stern as they killed in a frenzy. They were like a steel wall that blocked Dongxuan's pursuit. In the enemy's formation, a cold voice rang out, "Shadow cavalry. Charge over and crush them all." The enemies who were fighting all around suddenly split into 2 sides with a swoosh. Behind them, countless valiant black knights were like demons bursting out of the darkness. With the pressure of a mountain, they charged over ferociously. Tai Zheng's gaze was resolute. "Marshal." Hundreds of soldiers charged towards the shadow cavalry in a frenzy. "Go. Fire your arrows." With the command from the other side, the sky suddenly darkened. At this moment, hundreds of thousands of sharp arrows completely covered the sky. "Go." The remaining soldiers in the valley charged out at the same time, charging towards the shadow cavalry and the arrows that blotted out the sky. Tai Zheng. If you don't go, our brothers won't be able to rest in peace. Heart-wrenching roars rang out. Tai Zheng's entire body was dyed red with blood. He howled in despair as the two assistant generals pulled him back with all their might. Marshal! Go quickly. We still have a chance after we cross Tianshan Cliff. Tai Zheng's eyes were bulging so hard that they were about to tear, blood flowing out. His tears were mixed with the fresh blood as he finally roared, "Go! Go!" The shrill roar was like the howl of a wounded beast in the wilderness. Han Sanha. Tai Zheng's voice rang through the land. If I, Tai Zheng, don't die, I will kill you. I will kill you. The army had retreated into the valley. However, Han Sanha's Dongxian troop was chasing after them in a frenzy as if they had risked their lives, almost biting the tail of Yutang's army. Shadow Cavalry. Even if we have to run to our deaths, we must not lose Tai Zheng's army. This was Han Sanha's absolute command. This god of war had a cold heart that was beyond anyone's imagination. He was ruthless to the enemy, but he was merciless to his own soldiers as well. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as they pursued Tai Zheng's defeated army, Yutang's military force would crumble completely. Even if Yutang still remained in the world after this war, the natural barrier of Yutang would be lost and half of its territory would be lost. It would also be removed from the ranks of the 5 empires. It would then be reduced to a weak force at the mercy of others. Han Sanha had decided that he would not give Tai Zheng a chance to regroup his army, no matter the cost. All members of the Shadow Cavalry, attack Tai Zheng. The countless remaining soldiers opened up a path spontaneously, allowing their brothers to enter, but they did not move. There's no use in a crippled body, cover the army with your life. Countless remaining soldiers used their lives to initiate a spontaneous charge, charging forward in a frenzy against the enemy army that was coming at them from all directions. Even if they could only delay the enemy by a single step, they had to charge forward. Brothers who have fallen in battle back then. Someone hollered, "I'm coming. Brothers, you're all here." A burly man bellowed, waving his saber with his remaining arm as his muscular body charged forward like an iron tower. Brothers' families, I, Du Haizi, can't do my best anymore in the future, but your father is happy to see all of you, I have no regrets. Ha ha ha. Hundreds of remaining soldiers guffawed together, raising their sabers as they charged into the enemy's formation. No regrets for the empire. No regrets for the family. No regrets for the brothers. On the other side was a cliff. On the cliff, the 800 remaining soldiers had thrown all the rocks they had collected down, but they still could not stop Dongxuan's army. Suddenly, an order was issued. One man, one saber, stop them with our lives. The 800 remaining soldiers formed groups of 50 men, jumping down from the 300 feet high cliff with bloodshot eyes and sabers in their hands. It was just that there was no chance of survival at this height. They had treated their bodies as rolling logs and boulders with sabers. If I can kill one of them, it's my gain. If I can crush one of them, it's my gain. If I can't kill or crush them to death, I'll *King fall as a rock to stop your advance. Tai Zheng's tears of blood flowed. There were a few times when he wanted to cry out and die fighting here. However, he did not even have the chance to reorganize his troops. Being chased from the back, Tai Zheng had wanted to reorganize his troops several times, but it was too late. The Shadow Cavalry was less than 1,000 feet behind them. If they were to stop and reorganize at such a distance, a single charge from the enemy could annihilate all of them. They could only run. Run to a safe distance. However, how could the enemy give them such a safe distance? The forest on both sides was dense, the weeds were overgrown beneath their feet, almost reaching their waists. The northwest wind howled, almost blowing at them as they ran. Tianshan Cliff. They had arrived at Tianshan Cliff. Tai Zheng cried into the sky, Tianshan Cliff. The 9 supremes have sacrificed themselves here. Do I, Tai Zheng, have to die fighting here as well? So what if I, Tai Zheng, die fighting? I hate that hundreds of millions of Yutong's people are going to perish under Dongxuan's shadow cavalry. I, Tai Zheng, die with everlasting regret. 9 Supremes. If you can see this from the heavens, save Yutong. Save Yutong. Tai Zheng cried in despair, spitting a mouthful of fresh blood. At the corner, countless silhouettes of the shadow cavalry had appeared in a flash. In the dark, 40 to 50 phantom-like silhouettes appeared. Without a sound, the cold gleam of their swords and sabers formed a bright circle around Tai Zheng. Dark shadows. Tai Zheng was exhausted, but he suddenly guffawed. Your father has long heard of Dongxuan's dark shadows. Come on. He bellowed and took large strides forward. The people in the dark shadows fell from all directions without a word. With a roar, Tai Zheng counterattacked swiftly with his long sword. However, he was a general after all. Facing such martial world experts, he was obviously no match for them. In the blink of an eye, his body was already riddled with wounds. Martial. Dozens of janissaries sprung up and welcomed the sabers and swords with their own bodies in the air, blocking the sudden attack for Tai Zheng. Fresh blood splattered. Warm drops of blood fell on Tai Zheng's face. Tai Zheng bellowed, his eyes wide with rage, his heart aching so much that he almost stopped breathing. Another dozen of janissaries charged forward with all their might. In the dark night, a coarse laughter rang out. Marshal. Don't forget me for the wedding wine. In the next moment, the person who said this had already plunged his saber into the enemy's chest, and the enemy's head flew high into the air with a flash of cold light. In the dark night, only the whistling of sabers and swords could be heard and the sound of blood spurting could be heard. Tai Zheng's body swayed and he fell to the ground. Beside him, a guard breathed with difficulty. There was a ghastly wound between his waist and abdomen, his intestines almost popping out as blood gushed out. Brother. Tai Zheng tore off a piece of his shirt with difficulty, wanting to bandage his wound. Marshal. The wounded soldier on the ground suddenly bellowed and sprung up with all his might, pushing Tai Zheng aside. A saber fell like lightning and sliced into his abdomen. Tai Zheng roared and slashed the assassin from head to toe in a frenzy. He then turned to look at the wounded soldier. Brother, Marshal. The wounded soldier smiled. Don't forget me for the wedding wine. I wanted to congratulate Marshal with my unparalleled military merit, I'm sorry. His head tilted to the side and he stopped breathing. Yes. Yes. Brother. Drink as much as you want. Tai Zheng's eyes were brimming with hot tears, his voice choking. Brother, my brother. Countless personal guards rushed forward and fought with the enemy in the darkness of the night. The sound of metal blades slicing through the air was endless. Outside the valley, the rumbling of hooves was getting closer. The shadow cavalry had arrived. Yutong's steel cavalry who were retreating suddenly reined in their horses in unison, their faces solemn. Marshal. Let's fight. Tens of thousands of people shouted at the same time, their eyes bloodshot. Fight? Tai Zheng stood up with difficulty, his muscular body drenched in blood from top to bottom. He murmured to himself, then suddenly roared, Let's fight. I, Tai Zheng, have let down my brothers in this life. Let us fight to the death together. Beneath the ground, we shall unite our troops and fight again. It's the brothers who have let down Marshal. An assistant general's voice was choking. We wanted to congratulate Marshal with our unparalleled military merit. It's too bad that we brothers have let down Marshal. Sister-in-law is the one who has let down the most. Sister-in-law. Tai Zheng's gaze froze. The frail silhouette leaning against the door seemed to have suddenly appeared before him. The battlefield is perilous, take care. Yes, Qian. When I come back, I'll take you as my wife. I want the entire army, the entire nation's people to celebrate our victory, to celebrate our wedding. I'll wait for you, Tai Zheng laughed forlornly at the sky. He had joined the army when he was young. His military career was long and arduous. It was only when he was 39 years old that he finally had the thought of starting a family. Who would have thought that it would all be for naught? The enemy's hooves thundered in his ears, their cries deafening. Don't think you can escape, Tai Zheng. Kill. The gentle face gradually faded from Tai Zheng's sight, turning into the swaying scenery far away. After I die, find a good husband, but remember, don't look for someone from the army. He turned around, his face had already become cold and hard, his spear propped on the ground, like a towering mountain. He shouted, "Fight! Fight!" The soldiers of the army roared in unison, their eyes filled with blood. Prepare to recoup your losses. Brothers, prepare yourselves. Tai Zheng laughed, still as heroic as ever. In his eyes, the gentle silhouette had finally turned into smoke and dissipated. What was left was a steely, murderous, courting death. 500 feet away, a troop of Dongxuan's shadow cavalry had appeared, the gleam of their sabers and spears gleaming coldly in the night. All of you. Tai Zheng hollered, his voice shaking the air. Yes. Tens of thousands of troops shouted in unison. Just as Tai Zheng was about to give the order, his spear pointed forward and a battle to the death was about to leave his mouth. He stopped abruptly, his entire body stiffening. This was because, it was at this very moment. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew down from Tianxian Cliff. Whoosh, 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 the northwest wind that had been raging suddenly changed its direction. It blew in the opposite direction. The howling of the wind grew louder and louder. The shrill sound of the wind turned into the howl of the devil. The trees of the entire forest bent in unison, sweeping towards the shadow cavalry. Tianxian Cliff's unique terrain had actually turned into a lethal trap. A lethal trap for Dongxian. Tai Zheng's heart skipped a beat, so did all the Yutang soldiers. The scene was so familiar. Could it be, could it be? Chapter 85. A fierce wind suddenly rose in the opposite direction. With a whoosh, the wind suddenly reached its peak. The weeds on the road flew up violently, and the branches on the trees suddenly snapped. Whoosh. 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 As for Yutang's soldiers, they were not affected at all. Tai Zheng's face was drenched in blood and tears, but he stood still as if he had suddenly stiffened. His eyes were like bronze bells as he stared in the direction of Tianxian Cliff. 9 Supremes. Supreme wind is here. As the sound of the wind reached its peak, a ball of fire suddenly shot up into the sky from behind Tai Zheng. The fire soared into the sky, spreading towards Dongxuan's army at an unbelievable speed. Just as the fire appeared, it had already scorched hundreds of feet into the air. The Dongxian shadow cavalry that had just charged over, numbering up to 1,000 men, were instantly engulfed in the sea of fire. The rest of the cavalrymen were urging their horses to gallop with all their might. They simply could not stop in time and crashed into the fire one after another. Immediately, miserable cries rang out from all directions. The fire crackled like a demon's before it soared into the sky with a boom and spread across the plains. Dongxuan's army within a 300-mile radius was suddenly engulfed in a frenzied sea of fire. There seemed to be a demon laughing in the flames. How dare a Dongxian brat act so presumptuously in front of Tianxian Cliff? The wind howled. Raging flames rushed to the heavens. Supreme wind and flame. Hundreds of thousands of Yutang's soldiers were teary-eyed. Looking at the silent Tianxian Cliff, they suddenly knelt down in unison. 9 Supremes Lords. With a roar, the voices of these hot-blooded men who were walking the line between life and death choked, hot tears swirling in the air. Han Sanha looked to the southwest where Tai Zheng had already broken through the siege. The shadow cavalry had already chased after them. 30,000 shadow cavalry flanking and 50,000 pursuing, Han Sanha was certain that Tai Zhang would not stand a chance against such a fearless charge. Even if it was him, there was absolutely no way for him to regroup and fight again under such circumstances and turn defeat into victory. The outcome of this battle was already decided. After planning for so long, it was finally time to reap the harvest. Fortunately, the 9 Supremes were no longer around. Otherwise, faced with the complicated terrain of the Empire of Yutong and the presence of existences like the 9 Supremes, they would not have dared to advance recklessly. Because they didn't know when they would be ambushed. Moreover, he would lose in a baffling manner. "Marshal, Yutong has almost completely lost to you this time." The general at the side had an excited look on his face. "Only the marshal can accomplish this feat of expanding our territory." Han Sanha smiled calmly and said, "This old man has spared no expense in military strength in this battle. I've forcefully annihilated Tai Zhang's 100,000 troops and 200,000 reinforcements. It's still too early to say that I'm expanding my territory. However, the Empire of Yutong's energy won't be able to recover for at least 10 years after this battle. Our army's biggest gain should be pushing our territory 2,000 miles forward, right towards Yutong's capital. But we can't say that these are already in our hands." There was a deep yearning in Han Sanha's eyes. Because there are still 2 old men in the Empire of Yutong who have yet to make a move. Although Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin are known as the saber and sword duo, they haven't led an army for so many years. Besides, they're getting on in years and are no longer what they used to be. Marshal will definitely be able to do it. A general at the side fawned over him. Yes, the Empire of Yutong's elites have been defeated by the marshal after this battle. Even if Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin are the saber and sword duo, what can they do when they have no soldiers to use? Han Sanha said faintly, "Perhaps Mu Wuyun's lack of soldiers makes sense, but Gao Han, you said that they are no longer what they used to be, you have to pay attention. As a general, you must never underestimate the enemy at any time. This is a fatal thing and the cause of defeat." The 2 generals beside him bowed at the same time. This lowly general will remember it. Even if they have no soldiers to use, these 2 old men can still defend Yutong and contend with me for 3 to 5 years. Han Sanha's expression was bleak. Because the Emperor of Yutong trusts these 2 people without reservation. Behind him, Mu Wuyun, Gao Han, and Zhang Gu were silent, not daring to say a word. The old marshal's meritorious deeds were enough to intimidate the emperor. Dongxuan's emperor was extremely wary of the old marshal now. This was no longer a secret in the military. Han Sanha's words were, of course, spoken from the bottom of his heart. After this battle, Dongxuan's unshakable foundation can be established. Han Sanha said bleakly, "Yutong can be crippled, can be weak, but it cannot be destroyed. It's like a ferocious tiger. We only need to knock out its claws and teeth. That will be enough." If the empire were to be annihilated, Dongxian would immediately become a public enemy. Han Sanha stood with his arms behind his back, looking at the deafening battle cries from afar as he uttered word by word, "We would fall into the same situation as Yutong, surrounded by enemies from all sides. Marshal is wise. If Yutong were to be annihilated, we might not be able to hold on as long as Yutong." Han Sanha sighed. Yutong has 3 famed marshals after all. That's why they can hold on for so long. Yutong alone has 3 of the top 10 famed generals in the continent. However, Tai Zhang and his trusted generals must die. There was respect in Han Sanha's eyes as he said slowly, "In the last battle, Tai Zhang has brought up the rear personally and all the generals have stayed behind to bring up the rear for the army. He has won over Yutong's military heart. With time, he will become the true soul of the army. After this battle, Tai Zhang will rise to the same position as Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin in Yutong's military, perhaps even higher. Besides, Tai Zhang is young and strong, that's the scariest thing. Therefore, no one can die in this battle, but Tai Zhang must. Otherwise, he'll be a huge threat to us." Han Sanha's evaluation of Tai Zhang had gone up 3 notches after this battle. The southwest wind howled. The three generals felt that Han Sanha's lean silhouette was like a celestial being at this moment. He could summon clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. It was at this moment that the wind seemed to have stopped. Han Sanha frowned and asked faintly, "Why has the wind stopped?" Han Sanha frowned and asked faintly, "Why did the wind stop?" The three generals looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. This old man observed the sky at night. The southwest wind has been blowing strongly for the past few days. It's the best time to pursue and attack. Our army is going with the wind, so it's the right time. Why did the wind stop? While he was speaking, suddenly, the wind blew again, and he felt a sharp pain in his face. The wind changed direction. Han Sanha's expression changed. The world knows about the death of the 9 Supremes, but Supreme Wind isn't here. Why did the wind suddenly change direction? Han Sanha's eyes were filled with uncertainty. Just as Zhang Xian was about to speak, the wind had already grown stronger and stronger. The wind was so strong that people could barely stand. There's definitely something fishy about this. Han Sanha frowned deeply. Send the order. Ask the pursuing army to slow down. This decision was extremely difficult to make. This was because if they followed up with the attack, they could completely annihilate Taizheng. However, if he gave up and slowed down, it would give Taizheng a chance to catch his breath. This caused another variable to appear in this battle. "Marshal, please reconsider." Zhang Ge said, "The death of the 9 Supremes is undeniable. The change in the wind's direction is only due to the might of heaven and earth. The enemy has already been defeated, it's impossible." Han Sanha felt a sense of dread growing within him as he said decisively, "As long as there's something fishy on the battlefield, there must be a reason. Send the order immediately." The horn rang. However, just as the horn rang, Han Sanha's expression changed drastically. Because, up ahead, thick smoke suddenly soared into the sky, and raging flames surged. In the blink of an eye, the towering inferno had burned through hundreds of miles of forest. It had only been a blink of an eye, but the intensity of the fire had doubled. The next step was an earth-shattering blaze that soared into the sky. Supreme wind and flame. Han Sanha's expression changed. Retreat at once. However, it was too late. All the soldiers who had entered the canyon were engulfed in the inferno. The inferno was like a living fire dragon, charging out of the canyon and engulfing the tens of thousands of men nearby. Toppling mountains and overturning seas, it continued to spread at an extremely fast speed. Tianxian Cliff's unique terrain, the forest of towering trees, had turned into a merciless sea of fire that devoured human lives at the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. How could this be? Disbelief colored Han Sanha's eyes. The 9 Supremes were dead. The news was so accurate that some of his men had even witnessed the deaths of the 9 Supremes with their own eyes. They had personally participated in the deaths of the 9 Supremes. How could they still be here? Hundreds of miles away, the heat wave from the fire was still searing to his cheeks. All of this was like a dream, unbelievable, yet it was happening right before his eyes. A gust of wind and fire had turned an army of 200,000 men into nothingness. What pained Han Sanha the most was the 80,000 shadow cavalry. Retreat. Assemble. Count. Clear the losses. Han Sanha ordered through gritted teeth, give up on the pursuit. Shift to defense. This battle has been lost. Retreat, return to defense immediately. Defend the border, Lunar Wall Fortress. Abandon the westward strategy immediately. As Han Sanha finished speaking, his skinny frame stood on the peak of the mountain. Suddenly, his face paled and he swayed. This battle was too much for him to accept. He knew that the 9 Supremes were dead, that was why he had accepted His Majesty's order to lead the army here. He had not expected that they would fall into a vicious trap in this battle. The 9 Supremes were not dead. Supreme Wind and Flame had attacked and killed hundreds of thousands of Dongxuan's elites in just one battle. If they dared to advance recklessly under such terrain, if the other Supremes were still around, even if the 400,000 men were to be wiped out, it would not be surprising at all. Han Sanha gritted his teeth, a sharp, murderous glint in his eyes. Who was it that provided such absurd and erroneous information? Investigate it when we return. The 9 Supremes were dead, and the empires of the continent were recuperating, replenishing the resources that had been damaged by the previous years of war. This was not the time to send troops, but the empire had to. Now, they found out that the 9 Supremes were not dead. Had they used 200,000 men as a test? The doubt rose instinctively in Han Sanha's heart. Thick smoke billowed 800 miles in front of him as flames soared into the sky. Countless men and horses were like fireballs, rolling and screaming amidst the conflagration. Some of them fell silent as they rolled, but the flames were still burning fiercely. Han Sanha closed his eyes dejectedly. After a long time, he uttered word by word, "This war is the shame of this old man's life." Not only had they been defeated, they might have been set up. The empire of Dongxian had retreated. However, Tai Zheng had already reached his limit and was unable to pursue them. What a joke! It was already a blessing to be able to survive Han Sanha's relentless attacks. Moreover, the empire of Dongxian was not defeated. Their troops were organized and their combat power was complete. If they were to pursue them, they would definitely be bitten. In spite of this, Yutong's army was in high spirits now. A strong gust of wind and a great fire had driven the enemy back. Such a situation was nothing short of a miracle. What was even more exhilarating was that the 9 Supremes had appeared again. The 9 Supremes have shown themselves. Someone's eyes were brimming with tears. Bulsh *T. Someone was enraged. The 9 Supremes aren't dead, they're just hiding. Tai Jing panted for a long time before he stood up. His head was dizzy, his feet felt like he was stepping on cotton, his wounds were still bleeding profusely. His janissaries came forward to stop the bleeding in a flurry, but he did not seem to feel it at all, his eyes lost. After a long time, he shuddered and suddenly cried out, "Where are the 9 Supremes?" This general, Tai Zheng, would like to thank the 9 Supremes lords for saving my life. Please allow me to lend you a helping hand. Everyone held their breaths as soon as the words left his mouth. Even those who were severely injured gritted their teeth, not making a single sound. Their gazes were fervent as they craned their necks to look straight at Tianxian Cliff. How they wished that the 9 mysterious masked figures would step out from the forest. That would be the happiest thing for Yutong's warriors. Countless people were panting like bellows, feeling their blood boiling. They were just waiting for the 9 Supremes to appear so that they could cheer at once. The flames were blazing, the wind was howling, and the crackling of burning was incessant. Other than that, there was no other sound. Tai Jing did not give up as he called out, "9 Supremes lords. Tai Jing requests an audience." There was still no sound, the forest was silent. There was no response. Tai Jing sighed. Reorganize the army. Check the damage. Treat the wounded. Return to the Fortress of Resilience at the fastest speed. Gather the people to help rebuild the Fortress of Resilience immediately. Deputy marshals, you will be in charge of these matters. Send the battle report to the capital at once. Also, investigate the Empire of Dongxuan's movements. Do not slack off. The deputy marshal nodded in acknowledgement. What about you, Marshal? Tai Jing sighed. I'm tired, I want to rest here. The deputy marshal was well aware of this. He knew that the marshal had not given up on meeting the 9 Supremes. If there were too many people, the 9 Supremes would not appear. Perhaps, if there were too few people, the 9 Supremes would come out to meet them. Also, Tai Jing closed his eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks. Clean up the corpses of our brothers. Before he could finish, he spat out another mouthful of blood, his heart wrenching with pain. Yes. The deputy marshal kept quiet for a bit and said in a low voice, if Marshal sees, the 9 sirs, please greet them on my behalf." He turned and hollered, "Janissaries stay. The rest of you, depart immediately." Tai Zheng had been standing on Tianxian Cliff. This was the 9 Supremes Memorial Hall built by the Empire of Yutong. The sculptures of the 9 masked men stood on the stage in a carefree and natural manner, their gazes filled with disdain as if they were still laughing at the world. Tai Zheng waited for a full 3 days. There was no news at all. "Marshal, this." A janissary said carefully, "The statues of Lord Supreme Wind and Lord Supreme Flame seem to be stained, and there's a smell of fire. Is it really these 2 lords who have manifested themselves, and not?" Tai Zheng looked disappointed. Indeed. Compared to the other 7 Supremes, the sculptures of Supreme Wind and Lord Flame seemed to have gone out before. Even Tai Zheng was a little doubtful. Could it be that Supreme Wind and Lord Flame had manifested themselves? Were they not dead? When the 9 Supremes went to war, all 9 of them had always gone out together. There had never been a time when only 2 of them participated in the war. 9 Supremes Lords. Tai Zheng knelt on both knees. "Thank you for saving me. The heroic spirits are not far away, accept my bow." Tai Zheng heaved a long sigh and descended Tianxian Cliff after he was done bowing. "Since the 9 Supremes are unwilling to meet me, I shall feign ignorance as well. Pass down the order, just say that." Tai Zheng's expression was solemn as he said softly, "The army has been defeated. In the face of danger, the 9 Supremes Lords Wind and Lord Flame have manifested themselves in midair and defeated the enemy. The border has been saved." Yes. After the war, the gale had changed its direction, turning into a strong east wind. Yin Yang was squeezing out the last of his strength. The sky was moaning as the clouds filled the sky like a mighty army, advancing towards Yutong at lightning speed. It was as if countless heroic spirits were marching in the direction of their hometown in a neat formation. The battlefield has been through 100 battles, a general can't avoid death on the battlefield. A man should have no regrets in life. What harm is there in dying for the country and the people? The loyal heart shines like the sun and moon, the iron bones forge the border, the 10,000 miles of wind blows, sending the loyal souls back to Yutong. There's no end to the chapter, let's finish writing 4,600 words. Chapter 86. The entire empire of Yutong was boiling with excitement. The 9 Supremes had manifested themselves and defeated the enemy. This was a story with a strong sense of legend, but when it was narrated vividly by the mouths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield, only God knew how much shock it would cause. 3,000 miles of haste, the good news was relayed on horseback. Along the way, the Empire of Yutong was bombarded by the news in just 7 to 8 days. After a great victory on the battlefield, the country was protected, the strong enemy had retreated, and the country was safe. It was in such a war that the legend of the 9 Supremes was born. In the tea house. Did you know? The 9 Supremes Lords have appeared again. I only know that the 9 Supremes Lords have shown themselves and repelled Dongxuan's army. That's right, that's right. One fire burned Dongxuan's million soldiers. It's so satisfying to have the continent's top general, God Han Sanha, return in defeat. It's all thanks to the 9 Supremes Lords, or else, I knew that good people would be rewarded. The 9 Supremes Lords are definitely not dead. It's said that it's dead. This time, it's a manifestation. Someone said hesitantly. Suddenly, the lively atmosphere became stagnant. A few of them turned to look at the fellow who claimed that the 9 Supremes were dead with unfriendly expressions. He panicked. I didn't mean it that way, then what do you mean? Someone shouted sternly. How dare you say that the 9 lords are dead? Brothers, kill him. A group of people swarmed forward. Shut up if you don't know how to speak. F***ck your mother, even if your entire family dies, the 9 Supremes Lords won't die. Spare me, the whole nation was in jubilation. Tai Zhang's notebook was filled with a thick stack of words. I am guilty. I almost lost the battle, Your Majesty, please punish me, I have something to say. In this battle, I saw the remnants of the army join the battle of their own accord. They fought with their lives on the line. I am deeply moved by this. On behalf of 300,000 soldiers, I ask for merit for the remnants of the army. I implore Your Majesty to give them a generous pension and bestow them with honor. Of the 100,000 cavalrymen, 37,500 died in battle. Of the 300,000 soldiers, there are now more than 200,000 left. Our soldiers should bleed and sacrifice their lives, but the remnant soldiers volunteered to fight. The entire nation gathered 83,000 remnant soldiers, and 27,360 died in battle. No one was injured. I am ashamed. In the face of such casualties, I am ashamed to show my face. Half of Tai Zhang's petition was an apology. Half of it was to ask for credit. He was asking for forgiveness for himself and asking for credit for the wounded army. However, there was no mention of the two words 9 Supremes in the entire book. Morning court session. His Majesty read aloud in the middle of the hall. Yutong has so many passionate warriors. With such citizens, what does Yutong have to fear? It's just that, in the past, it was I who mistreated these meritorious ministers. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stepped out at the same time. War broke out at the borders, and our army was in a precarious situation. Disabled and retired soldiers volunteered to join the battle, and there were those everywhere. In fact, a few days after the war ended, on the road, there were even people who spontaneously formed teams to join the battle. Valiant loyalty, righteous passion, the soul of Yutong's army. This old subject also has a collective petition from the remaining soldiers. Please pass it to His Majesty. Qiu Jianhan said. Read. The king's face was flushed with excitement. He said loudly, read it. Read it to all the civil and military officials. Let them remember it and teach the officials at all levels how to be good parents. Yes, Your Majesty. The old marshal acknowledged and took out a letter from his bosom. When he opened it and glanced at it, he was stunned for a moment. Immediately after, his burly body trembled, and his tiger eyes instantly turned red. Only a few words. The old marshal's voice was trembling. Long live Your Majesty. This subject is blessed to see His Majesty's face. As soldiers of the army, we only regret our incompetence and disability on the battlefield. We can no longer bathe in blood on the battlefield with our comrades and contribute to the nation. We are ashamed to receive Your Majesty's annual pension. Now that the nation is in danger, we killed the enemy on our own accord. It is our duty, we do not ask for any reward. Once the war is over, we will disarm and return to the countryside. We beg Your Majesty in death. The brothers who perished in this war have wives and children at home. Please, Your Majesty, be merciful and compensate them generously. Our wish is fulfilled, we have nothing else to ask for. As men of the army, our hearts are filled with passion. Whenever the country needs us, we shall fight on the battlefield again. It was obvious that the letter from the remnant army's representative had been embellished, but the letter was not particularly well written. The wording was average, even a little incoherent. There was no literary flair to speak of. However, the vast loyalty and hot-bloodedness in it were vividly displayed. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan read it without changing a single word. The entire imperial court was silent. Good, good, good. After a long time, His Majesty praised them thrice with hot tears in his eyes. These are my people. These are Yutong's children. I am deeply gratified and deeply touched. If I don't commend them for their bravery and loyalty, before His Majesty could finish, the old marshal apologized. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. This old official has something to say. These remnant soldiers have returned home after the war ended. Now that they are scattered, I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to gather again. It was extremely rude to interrupt the emperor's speech. However, old Marshal Chiu had to say it because if His Majesty were to mention commendation or something else, such as the need for a ceremony, then it would be difficult for them to gather. It would become an awkward matter instead. His Majesty was rather disappointed. Won't I be mistreating my meritorious subjects? Leng Daoyin heaved a long sigh beside him and said, this official can guess what these old brothers are thinking. They don't think that they've contributed much, but they think that all of this is how it should be. Besides, they feel sorry for their brothers who went out with them but didn't come back with them. Leng Daoyin heaved a long sigh. Your Majesty, those who have survived the war will feel that being alive is the greatest gift from God. No matter how bad it is, no matter how difficult life is, it's still much better and happier than those brothers who are lying on the battlefield. Old Marshal Chiu understood the sentiment as well. Sigh. His Majesty heaved a long sigh. If so, the 27,360 veterans who died in the war shall be compensated heavily. His Majesty said solemnly, 10 taels of gold for each family. Their children shall be subsidized in school. Also, this sum of compensation must be monitored properly. If there's any embezzler. His Majesty's voice was stern. 9 familial extermination. After the court session ended, everyone dispersed. However, old Marshal Chiu was kept behind by His Majesty. His Majesty was rather impatient. Is there any news? Chiu Jianhan shook his head. No. No. His Majesty looked at old Marshal Chiu suspiciously. Didn't Taijing tell you? Old Marshal Chiu chuckled humorlessly. The letter is here. He took it out from his robe and passed it to His Majesty. This. His Majesty read it carefully and his eyes widened in disbelief. Taizheng, he said it too, manifested. Old Marshal Chiu's expression darkened, not knowing what to say. Bastard. His Majesty could no longer hold it in as he roared, stomping his feet. Do you believe it? Old Marshal Chiu pursed his lips. I don't believe it either. Then, who is Taizheng trying to fool? His Majesty was furious. Am I that muddle-headed? Manifested? Taizheng must be muddle-headed. Call him back for this emperor. I want to punish him severely. Hold on, Your Majesty. Old Marshal Chiu stopped him quickly and said after some deliberation, this old official can understand Taizheng's thoughts. Besides, it's indeed more appropriate to say that he manifested his spirit now. His Majesty was panting, but he finally started to think. He was not stupid after all, he was just concerned and confused. Now that Chiu Jianhan had pointed it out, he understood immediately. The 9 Supremes have always acted in unison, but this time, only Supreme Wind and Flame have appeared. Old Marshal Chiu Jianhan's expression was grim. Besides, Taizheng's secret letter said that he felt that the abilities displayed by Supreme Wind and Flame were much weaker than before. His Majesty's expression darkened. The battle at Tianxian Cliff must be true. Even if the 9 Supremes were lucky to have survived, the others. I'm afraid, as for the damage to their abilities, it's to be expected. If so, there are too many uncertainties in the battle at Tianxian Cliff. Old Marshal Chiu deliberated and said word by word, why don't we confirm this news as a manifestation, and then, and so on. This way, the country can be at peace and the enemy can be numb. In addition, the empires will definitely be suspicious and won't dare to attack. This will give us a chance to breathe. The crisis of the 9 Supremes, let's not talk about the foreign and martial world, but the traitors in the imperial court and even the social classes must be found. Otherwise, there'll be endless trouble. If they can create Tianxian Cliff, can't they do it again? If that's the case, then it'll really be a catastrophe. Old Marshal Chiu tried his best to persuade him. As for Taizheng, there are many things to be done at the Fortress of Resilience now. Let him tidy things up there first. When the external affairs are settled, the reconstruction of the Fortress of Resilience is completed, and Dongshuan's external threat has been confirmed, Then we can summon Taizheng to the capital and let him report in detail to His Majesty. It won't be too late. By then, if His Majesty wants to punish this child, it'll only take a single word from him, old Marshal Qiu said. That makes sense. However, Taizheng has a request, old Marshal Qiu said. What request? His Majesty asked. He wants a grand wedding and to invite all the brothers in the military to his wedding wine, including the fallen soldiers. Old Marshal Qiu's expression was grim as he recounted the entire incident in detail. He sighed and said, "This," His Majesty grinned. "Does Taizheng have so much money to treat so many people to wine?" Old Marshal Qiu coughed but did not speak. Treating hundreds of thousands of troops and brothers who had died in battle to a drink, it was an astronomical figure. "I will pay for it." His Majesty gritted his teeth. Although the national treasury is empty, the money for the wine must be paid. Old Marshal Qiu sighed, hesitating to speak. The nation's money had been spent on the military and on the bereaved families of the deceased. His Majesty had never been lenient in this regard. However, the nation was truly out of money now. The money for the wine would be an astronomical figure. If it were to be spent, it might cause another commotion or even impeachment. The emperor would then face immense pressure. The people were already in dire straits. You're spending so much money to buy wine and pour it on the graves. However, if you don't spend it, are you not going to fulfill the last wishes of tens of thousands of heroes who have died, and such an insignificant wish at that? They only want to drink a cup of the marshal's wedding wine. The old marshal thought that it was not easy for His Majesty. His Majesty paced and suddenly lowered his voice. "Old Qiu, you said that Supreme Wind and Flame are still alive. Is this true?" Qiu Jianhan was exasperated. "I've made it clear just now, it's best that we don't talk about this anymore." "Why are you?" This old official feels that, it's similar yet not. Qiu Jianhan hesitated. His Majesty grew more and more excited. "Then, if Supreme Wind and Flame are still alive, do you think that the other Supremes might still be alive as well?" The old marshal's eyes widened. "Aren't you thinking too much? Even if it's these two, it's hard to tell if it's true or not, then, my child." The king was full of hope. Is he still? At this point, his eyes lit up. He's still alive? Old Marshal Qiu felt like he was going crazy. Perhaps there was a 10 to 20% chance that someone else was still alive, but it was impossible for Supreme Earth. If Supreme Earth was still alive, even if he only had one breath left, the first person to know about it would be His Majesty the Emperor. It's a little uncertain. The old marshal was honest. His Majesty's eyes widened, rage surging within him. "How dare you, Qiu Jianhan? How dare you deceive the Emperor?" The old marshal was speechless. When did this old man deceive the Emperor? Even if you're the Emperor, you can't just accuse me of a crime. Chapter 87. This old official is innocent. Qiu Jianhan was speechless. This old official has never lied to your Majesty. Your Majesty, this old official dares not accept this accusation. Old thing. You still refuse to admit your guilt? His Majesty was obviously exasperated. Witness and material evidence are here. Qiu Jianhan was confused. Humph. A secret letter. A secret letter. His Majesty stretched a hand under the old marshal's nose. Give it to me. Show it to me. Not giving it to me is a crime of deceiving the Emperor. What secret letter? A secret letter from Taizheng to you. You said it yourself just now. His Majesty's expression was ferocious with pride. I knew that you two master and disciple were in cahoots. Deceiving the Emperor. The old marshal recalled what he had said just now. Taizheng's secret letter said that he felt that Supreme Wind and Flame's abilities were much weaker than before. However, there was no mention of this in the report to His Majesty. His expression turned bitter. Gosh, the Emperor and his official were fooling around. His Majesty knew that he had been indulging in fantasy just now. He sighed and said, "Old Xiao, what is that child from the Yun family doing now?" Old Marshal Qiu said, "I heard that he hasn't left the house for months, only keeping a cat at home." Keeping a cat? His Majesty was exasperated. This bastard. Old Marshal Qiu pursed his lips. After the meeting that day, His Majesty had left in disappointment, but he had sent a secret order: pay close attention to Yun Yang. For this matter, the old marshal had sent out 30 secret agents from the Board of War. The entire residence of Marquis Yun could be said to be watertight in all directions. All the movements were under his watch. Is the residence of Yun still as quiet as before? His Majesty asked. It's all right. The old marshal chuckled humorlessly. That steward of his was originally an expert, but recently, he seemed to have a breakthrough and become stronger. And this little fellow, I don't know where, recruited another expert who's even stronger than that housekeeper. I heard that it was the mystical beast battle back then. Qiu Jianhan had already investigated this matter. After explaining it to the emperor, even the emperor felt that it was a little strange. Randomly picked up a person? An expert? And from then on, you're dead set on me? His Majesty smacked his lips. Such a simple-minded and loyal man. Why can't I find him? The old marshal looked up at the sky. Almost 2 months ago, Marquis Yun entered the palace. We talked for a while. His Majesty chuckled, but there was a flash of complicated light in his eyes. I have a question for him. You have been unmarried for so many years. When did you get such a big son? Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan was immediately intrigued. What did Marquis Yun say? This is the 6th time I've asked him this question, His Majesty said. Before, he always told me not to get involved in these things. But this time, his story changed. He said, he won't rebel anyway, so what's the point of asking? The king smiled bitterly. The corners of old Marshal Qiu's lips twitched. There was actually someone who spoke like that. However, this makes me understand. His Majesty said faintly, Yin Yang is not Marquis Yun's biological son. Old Marshal Qiu wanted to ask, what does this have to do with you? Why are you so concerned? Then, he recalled that this matter really had something to do with His Majesty. If Yin Yang was Marquis Yun's biological son, he would be of royal blood. Luckily, he wasn't. Old Marshal Qiu was relieved. His Majesty said, it's always good to be careful. I have a feeling that the child is not as simple as he seems. His Majesty frowned. I also feel that the child is not as simple as he seems. The old marshal frowned as well. Both the emperor and his officials seemed to be deep in thought. The 9 Supremes' manifestation this time. His Majesty snorted, obviously displeased with the word manifestation. He said, this child hasn't moved, has he? Qiu Jianhan shook his head. He hasn't moved at all. Great young Master Yun, whom old Marshal Qiu had said was motionless, was indeed motionless now. At this moment, he was lying weakly on his own bed. His face was pale, and his cheeks were sunken in. He looked like a skeleton. Yin Yang was utterly exhausted during this period of time. His mental and physical strength were completely drained. It had been 50 consecutive days. Yin Yang had barely closed his eyes. The mystique wind conjuration was easy to cultivate, wind and cloud were one. Yin Yang had only spent 10 days in the residence of 9 Supremes to open Supreme Wind's door. He had obtained the art of Crimson Sky. However, when he returned home with the art of Crimson Sky, he had Emmy's full help, 2 pearls of Flood Dragon, a sea of fine jade's air essence, and Emmy's own air of vitality. He had only managed to cultivate it after 8 days. Only then could he open 7th Brother Supreme Blood's room. He had obtained 6th Brother's Thunder Crash spell, but the cultivation of the Thunder Crash spell was much more difficult than the art of Crimson Sky. Yin Yang had cultivated the first stage without sleep or rest for 12 days, opened 6th Brother's room, and obtained 5th Brother's Fiery Charm. Only then did he truly begin to cultivate in the dark. The battle reports from the front line were like snowflakes. Tai Zheng was obviously not Han Sanhe's opponent. Han Sanhe's military tactics were superb, already at the pinnacle of the world. Although Tai Zheng was also a peerless general, he was still far from being comparable to the god of war. There was no telling when he would be defeated. Yin Yang had to cultivate the first 3 stages of mystique wind conjuration and fiery charm before Tai Zheng's army was defeated. This was the bare minimum. Otherwise, it would be useless even if he went to the battlefield. During that period of time, Yin Yang cultivated like a madman. Emmy was constantly squeezed by him, almost going on strike. The energy of the 2 pearls of Flood Dragon was almost depleted. It was only after 1.5 months that Yin Yang finally broke through to the 3rd stage of fiery charm. He left his cultivation immediately and rushed to the battlefield. He had finally arrived at the critical moment. After that, he ran back through the night. When he reached home, he laid on the bed for a few days but was still weak. The exhaustion this time made Yin Yang feel like he was on the verge of dying at any moment. However, seeing the army celebrating in high spirits, the citizens cheering along the way, and the countless remaining soldiers returning in high spirits, Yin Yang still felt it. Worth it. Worth it. Especially when he saw Tiantong's remaining soldiers scatter outside the city yesterday, running back to their families and crying tears of joy. Countless joyous laughter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Countless elders' wrinkled faces had been filled with worry, but when they saw their loved ones returning, they smiled from the bottom of their hearts. Seeing these fearless men laughing heartily and raising their children high up in the air, the family seemed to be in a happy and harmonious mood. This is what I want to protect. Yin Yang lay on his bed, recalling these scenes, a genuine smile on his face. He was very happy. This was the first time Yin Yang felt the sense of fulfillment he felt after what had happened to his brothers. In life, there are things that one shouldn't do and things that one must do. A man is a hero if he does what he has the ability to do. He is a sinner if he doesn't do what he has the ability to do. This is my country. This is my family. I only want to have a clear conscience, that's enough. But I feel even more lonely now. After the war, the Empire of Yutong had finally entered a period of quiet peace. Yin Yang had stopped for a period of time as well. He had no other choice. The 10,000 miles raid had exhausted him continuously, forcefully using mystique wind conjuration and fiery charms power that could only be unleashed at the pinnacle of the 3rd or even 4th stage. He laid on the bed weakly for more than half a month before he recovered a little. When he could finally get off the bed, his legs felt like they were floating. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei were perplexed. Their young master's behavior during this period of time was too strange. There was an inexplicable atmosphere of a breakthrough, but it kept repeating itself. There were more than a dozen consecutive breakthroughs. Then there was a period of peace before he suddenly became so weak. Both of them could not figure out what was going on, no matter how hard they thought. Even Yin Yang himself did not expect the consequences of his desperate attempt would be so severe. For the worst few days, he could not use mystical qi, he could not even move a finger. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan had been deeply troubled during the time Yin Yang was lying on the bed. After the old marshal and his majesty had finished talking and returned home, he realized that the atmosphere was strange. After a few days, the feeling grew stranger. No matter where he went, there was always the feeling that someone was watching him. The situation was getting more and more serious. The old marshal could clearly feel that these gazes bore no malice. No murderous intent. What was going on? In the capital city, there was only one organization that could do this without malice, the Nine Heavens Dictum. But why is the Nine Heavens Dictum paying so much attention to me? The situation had suddenly disappeared one morning after 10 days. Everything had returned to normal. It was as if the inexplicable gazes were old Marshal Qiu's own speculation. None of this had happened. Old Marshal Qiu knew it, but he did not take any action. In spite of this, he was sure of one thing: there must still be someone alive in the Nine Supremes. War was obviously out of his league, so the Nine Heavens dictum was very nervous at this time. Perhaps the Nine Heavens dictum did not know which of their bosses had made a move and wanted to see his reaction. The conclusion made the old marshal very happy. Although it was not a good feeling to be watched, the old marshal would pour himself a cup of wine almost every night in high spirits and sigh in contentment. Although he did not know who was still alive. As long as someone was still alive, this old man would be satisfied. Although Yun Yang could move now, he was still very weak. It was impossible for him to continue fighting the Four Seasons Tower. Therefore, he still stayed at home. He did not go out. However, one morning, the residents of Yun suddenly received an invitation. It was an invitation from Cirrus House. Yun Zuyu had invited young Master Yun to Cirrus House, saying that there was a new song and dance that she wanted young Master Yun to take a look. When Lao Mei passed the invitation to Yun Yang, he could clearly see the momentary fear on Yun Yang's haggard face. It was an instinctive desire to escape. "I will be there on time," Yun Yang said with his eyes closed. Cirrus House. When Yun Yang arrived, he was pulled by Yun Zuyu for a private talk. In Yun Zuyu's most secret chamber, "It's him. Is it him? Did he do it?" Yun Zuyu's face was glowing. The light in her eyes was as dazzling as the stars in the sky. She was filled with hope and vitality. She was filled with longing. Supreme wind and flame helped in the battle. "Isn't it? Isn't it?" Yun Zuyu's face was flushed with excitement. Tears streamed down her face as she smiled, crying tears of joy. "He is all right, thank God, thank God." Yun Yang was completely stunned. Looking at Yun Zuyu's ecstasy, he felt like his throat was choked. Chapter 88. When Yun Yang had planned to do so, when he was using the identity of the Nine Supremes to quell the war, he had only been thinking of his responsibility, his brother's responsibility. To protect this country, to protect the people of his country, to not suffer from the pain of war. However, when he saw Yun Zuyu's invitation, Yun Yang finally regretted it. What he had done had undoubtedly indicated a fact: Supreme Flame was not dead. This was equivalent to him personally giving Yun Zuyu a dream that could never be realized. He had given her a hope that would forever be lost and hopeless. To Yun Zuyu, this was an incomparably cruel thing. It was even crueler than Supreme Flame's sacrifice. Initially, perhaps Yun Zuyu still had the possibility to extinguish this thought, to forget this emotion and start afresh. However, after this incident, there was no longer any possibility. This was because, in Yun Zuyu's heart, or perhaps in the hearts of the entire empire of Yutang's people, Supreme Flame was not dead. Since he was not dead, how could Yun Zuyu forget? How could she start afresh? She would only wait anxiously and watch over him with more and more passion. Looking at Yun Zuyu's behavior now, Yun Yang completely understood this. She had gone mad with joy. Young brother. Yun Zuyu's eyes were shining. Where is he? Where is he? Tell me. I beg you. Yun Yang looked at her helplessly. Please tell me. Yun Zuyu said anxiously, he has already come out to fight. He is no longer hiding it. Are you still not going to tell me? Yun Yang looked at her helplessly and could only say mechanically, I don't know. Yun Zuyu took 2 steps back in disappointment. Looking at Yun Yang, her fervent gaze gradually calmed down. It was like a burning flame that was slowly shrinking until it cooled down. Are you really Flame's brother? Yun Zuyu looked at Yun Yang coldly. Hearing the news that they are still alive, hearing that they are still fighting, aren't you excited at all? Yun Yang heaved a long sigh. Sister Yu, can I ask you something? Yun Yang asked. What is it? Yun Zuyu's gaze was still cautious. Do you think it is better for a person to live with a dream? Is it better to live in a dream forever? Or... Before Yun Yang could finish, he was interrupted by Yun Zuyu. She said coldly, this question is ridiculous. What's the point of living if one doesn't even have a dream? Especially a woman, if she doesn't even have dreams, then, what's the point of living? If a woman doesn't even have a dream, what's the point of living? Yin Yang muttered in his heart. Finally, she sighed softly and said, Sister Yu, you're right. When I heard that they were fighting, I was not happy at all. In fact, I was very unhappy. Yun Zuyu's expression changed as she looked at him coldly. What do you mean? Yin Yang sighed softly. Sister Yu, you might not know what kind of price you have to pay for this battle. Yun Zuyu's expression tensed. What is it? He instantly tensed up. He could only take it one step at a time. Yin Yang made up his mind and hesitated no longer. He said, after they were injured, there was no news of them for a whole year. It might be an exaggeration to say that they were struggling at death's door, but it's not an exaggeration to say that they were at the end of their rope. Now that the country is in danger, they have to act. In this battle, what they have to pay is not only the potential of their lives. Yun Zuyu's expression changed drastically. Especially when the bosses had successfully escaped the attention of the whole world with their deaths. But this battle has immediately made them the target of public criticism. Yun Yang looked at Yun Zuyu and asked, why should I be happy? Yun Zuyu's mind was in a whirl. She paced around in a fluster and said fearfully, that's right, why didn't I think of this? Now, they are really, even more dangerous than before. Yun Yang's heart throbbed in pain as he said, now, it's really a critical period. I'm hiding at home now, I don't go out under normal circumstances. Yun Ziyu said apologetically, young brother, I'm sorry. Sigh, your sister Yu is always like this. Women, cough, they like to be paranoid, it's nothing. Yin Yang felt a pang in his heart as he said, Sister Yu, you don't have to blame yourself. It's true that this young brother is burning with worry now, but it's beyond my reach. I don't know how the situation is. Yun Zuyu heaved a long sigh, her eyes looking out of the window as she said softly, as long as you can live well, as long as you can live well. I am willing to endure all the suffering for all eternity. Her voice was pious as if she was praying to the heavens. Yin Yang's heart ached. This infatuated woman, his heart grew more and more conflicted. How could he end this endless infatuation? Fifth brother, Yun Yang suddenly remembered that he had already opened Supreme Flame's fire room and the wills of his three brothers, fifth, sixth, and seventh, were all placed in his secret chamber. Previously, he had not dared to open them in order to focus on his cultivation. It looked like he would have to take a good look at them when he returned tonight. However, each time he thought of Supreme Wind's will, Yun Yang felt a stab of pain in his heart. Now, facing the wills of his three brothers, Yun Yang really felt a sense of homesickness. From the bottom of his heart, he did not want to open them. Because every time he opened it, he felt as if he was tearing his own heart apart. Sister Yu, did anyone come looking for trouble with you regarding Zhao Binglong's incident? Yun Yang asked. No, not really. After all, Zhao Binglong's crime was announced to the public right away. Yun Zuyu said, it's just that I'm a little troubled now. She hesitated for a moment before she smiled sweetly and said, but I can handle it. Yin Yang frowned and said, since Sister Yu says you're troubled, why don't you explain it clearly? Are you still treating this young brother as an outsider? What Sister Yu said just now, it makes me very sad. Yin Yang's words evoked Yun Zuyu's guilt. She quickly smiled apologetically and said, young brother, don't be angry. It's just a few aristocratic children. She stopped abruptly as she spoke. Yin Yang's expression turned harsh. East, west, north, and south? Or is it spring, summer, autumn, and winter? Yun Zuyu forced a smile and said, it's no big deal. Young brother, you go about your business. Sister Yu has a protective talisman here. Who dares touch Sister Yu? Don't you think so? Ha. Yin Yang thought about it and said with a smile, that's not bad. This young brother has lost his composure. Looking at Yun Zuyu's expression, he knew that this matter would not be so easily resolved. Besides, Yun Zuyu had said, "Who dares touch Sister Yu?" These 5 words made Yun Yang realize that this time, the target was not the other girls in Cirrus house but Yun Zuyu herself. Or perhaps it was the entire Cirrus house. This had long filled Yun Yang's heart with a murderous intent. However, he did not show it on his face. After a few more banter with Yun Zuyu, he bid his farewell. Yun Zuyu sent him to the door. Seeing that his expression was normal and his gaze was gentle as usual, she was slightly relieved that he did not seem to take the matter to heart. She only blamed herself. Why did I mention this? If young brother were to, wouldn't it be my fault? Yun Zuyu, oh Yun Zuyu, how many things have you been through? Why can't you control your mouth? Hopefully, Yun Yang has really let it go and not be impulsive. Yun Yang bade farewell to Yun Zuyu and walked back with a relaxed expression. It was only after he had turned into a street that his face fell. Who dared to touch Yun Zuyu and Cirrus house? Courting death. He snorted and reached into his robe to hold the jade pendant, sending out the 9 heavens dictum. Cirrus house was a place that Yun Yang had instructed to pay attention to. Whatever happened here had long been recorded. It had only been a quarter of an hour since Yun Yang had sent out the order and the whole story had already reached him. 10 days ago, young Master Chiu Yunsan of the Chiu family, one of the 4 noble families of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, had come to Cirrus house with a few others. When he had seen Yun Zuyu, he had suddenly become obsessed with her. He had reported to Cirrus house every day for 10 consecutive days. He had spent money like water and had even knelt outside Cirrus house to ask for Yun Zuyu's hand in marriage in front of everyone, wanting to take Yun Zuyu as a concubine. Yun Zuyu had not agreed, but this young Master Chiu had not been discouraged. His attacks had only become more aggressive. He had even brought out a lot of dignitaries to speak for Chiu Yunsan. He had not done anything rude, but it was extremely annoying to be pestered like this every day. Yin Yang's eyes gleamed coldly. Chiu Yunsan? Asking Yun Zuyu to be his concubine? How dare he? With a thought, the 9 heavens dictum sent out another message. What kind of dignitaries are the ones who spoke for him? This time, it was even faster. The message had been sent over in a flash. He did not even have the time to think. Obviously, the other party knew his boss temper and had already prepared all these things. Residence of Crown Prince's aide, Shui Yuehan. Board of War's Old Marshal Lang Daoyin's son-in-law, Zhou Zizheng. Plethora Gem Towers Tiantong's keeper, Fu Guansan. An. Yin Yang felt a jolt of surprise when he saw the last name. Old Marshal Chiu Jinhan's old mistress Ding. What kind of atrocious thing is this? Yin Yang felt suffocated. At once, an extreme rage that could burn the whole of Tiantang City red rose in his heart. Fifth brother's body was not even cold yet, but his sweetheart was being pressured to such an extent. The families of the 2 military bigwigs were actually involved. Even the Crown Prince's residence was involved. There was also a keeper of Plethora Gem Tower, a member of one of the martial world's mysterious forces. Yin Yang's rage was burning. If you're sincere in your pursuit and promise me the position of wife, even if Sister Yu has no intention of it, as long as you don't use any despicable means, I won't do anything, even if I'm not comfortable with it. After all, fifth brother is gone. Do I really have to let such a peerless beauty suffer for the rest of her life? However, the way things were going now was obviously oppressing people with their power. Although this young Master Chiu had not done anything out of line, Yin Yang understood the weight of it. I'm not bullying you by using these people to pressure you. However, if you think about it, how are you going to survive if you offend these people in Tiantang City? If you don't give these people face, what else do you want? What will the consequences be? What will happen to Cirrus house? What will happen to your sisters? These were all silent threats. Under such threats, there were not many in this world who could withstand it. Yin Yang's eyes were almost spitting fire. This matter had truly crossed his bottom line, making him hate the old marshal as well. If you don't know anything, settle it for me. Chapter 89. That night, old Marshal Qiu Jianhan was reading the military report in his residence. It was temporarily peaceful now. The Empire of Yutang finally had a period of peace to recuperate. The old marshal felt much more at ease. He was even in the mood to order for a few dishes to be made and drink by himself. However, just as he picked up the goblet, before he could drink it with a smile, he heard a long howl in the air. A fierce voice hollered, "You've gone too far." A ray of white light shot down from the sky. With a loud bang, it disappeared without a trace. Before anyone in the residence could even run out, the person had already disappeared. A ball of fire suddenly burned in a side room. The fire soared into the sky and thick smoke billowed. "Put out the fire. It's on fire." The residence was in chaos. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of guards blocked the entrance of the hall. The roof was also filled with military experts. In the blink of an eye, thousands of feet around old Marshal Qiu had been protected impregnably. "Stand down." The old marshal's muscular frame stood at the hall's entrance, trembling slightly. His eyes were looking at the room that had suddenly caught fire, his lips quivering. In his hand, there was a saber. There were bloodstains on the blade. What happened? Everyone in the residence was on high alert. The old mistress had made a rare appearance as well. "It's nothing." Qiu Jinhan's expression eased. "It's just a secret letter. This old man needs to deal with it urgently." As he spoke, he turned and went straight to the study, ignoring everyone else. He moved swiftly like the wind. The old marshal was agitated. Because, on this letter, there was a symbol of the 9 stars protector. The 9 heavens dictum. There were a few words on it, to old Marshal Qiu. Old Marshal Qiu knew very well what these words meant. He did not wish for anyone to see it. Therefore, he went to the study immediately and locked himself in it. It was a red package. It was like a flame. Old Marshal Qiu panted and opened it with trembling hands. As expected, there was a letter inside. Opening the envelope, there was only a thin piece of paper inside. Qiu Jinhan's expression changed when he read the first line. The first sentence was very rude. "Why did the military humiliate me?" The old marshal immediately sensed the murderous intent contained within those words. It was a surge of anger. He almost held his breath as he continued to read. The more he read, the wider his eyes became. Suddenly, he shouted, "I'm so angry." Glaring angrily, he slammed his palm on the table. The sturdy table immediately broke into pieces. Cirrus House's Zuyi belongs to Supreme Flame. What's the point of sending someone from the military ministry's House of Saber and Sword to persuade her to marry? Old Madame Ding had come personally, but where did she put me, Supreme Flame? If old Marshal is interested, why don't you find another home for His Majesty's Empress? Why do you have to humiliate the family of the 9 Supremes? The State Guarding General's residence is the matchmaker, the Marshal's residence is the guarantor, the Crown Prince's residence is the mediator, and the 10,000 Treasures Tower is the matchmaker. Under the 9 heavens dictum, I vow to never accept such humiliation. I will demand justice with my life. You're going too far. How dare you? The words used in the letter were harsh and the resentment contained within was appalling. It even went so far as to say, if old Marshal is interested, why don't you find another home for His Majesty's Empress? Why do you have to humiliate the family of the 9 Supremes? It was obvious that the other party's anger had reached a boiling point. Before he finished reading the letter, the old Marshal was already on the verge of vomiting blood. He was not angry at the other party's vile tone, but at the fact that such a thing had happened in his residence. It was a humiliation that would last for 10,000 years. Qiu Jianhan could only feel his face burning with embarrassment. Even if he was beaten until he was half dead, it would not be as uncomfortable as this feeling. What he hated the most was bullying the family of meritorious officials. Who would have thought that his own family would actually do it today? Thinking about how the nine heavens dictum had actually informed him in such an extreme way as his room being burned, the other party must have been extremely enraged. Thinking about the battle this time, Supreme Flame had obviously intervened. Then, who was the one who burned his room? Was there even a need to ask? The old marshal even thought that the other party had been merciful. Your father had just fought a war for you and you're forcing your father's woman to marry someone else? What kind of outrageous thing is this? The old mistress was still worrying when the residence was suddenly set on fire. Although the fire was not huge and only a room had been burnt, the meaning contained within was enough to send chills down one's spine. A sense of extreme danger lingered in her heart. Who in this world would dare to set fire to the residence of Marshall? Just as she was worrying, she heard the maid outside the room cry out in shock before she bellowed, "Scram!" A loud slap could be heard before her husband charged in furiously. He hollered, "What have you done?" The old mistress was stunned for a moment before she flew into a rage. "What? Have you gone mad?" Qiu Jianhan was furious as he lowered his voice. "Nonsense. You're the one who's gone mad. What you've done is heartless, unjust, shameless, and filthy. You still have the cheek to talk about this old man?" The old mistress was dumbfounded. The old marshal had always felt that he had neglected his wife throughout his life as a soldier, so he had always been obedient to the old mistress. Since when had he ever been so angry? What was wrong with him now? How could he curse so harshly? The old mistress felt that something was amiss. What happened? Not only was she not enraged, she was terrified instead. To be able to make her husband, who had taken care of her for a lifetime, so furious at her, this matter must be extremely serious. Qiu Jinhan's eyes were burning as he lowered his voice. What a disgrace. Let me ask you, have you been matchmaking these few days? The old mistress understood at once and said, "What's wrong with that?" "It's that nephew of yours. He's taken a liking to Cirrus House's Yun Ziyu when he first came to Tiantang and begged this old one to take her as a concubine. He came begging but you weren't there. Besides, it's not a big deal." Qiu Jianhan was trembling with rage. "Not a big deal? Madam, the sky is going to fall because of you. What else is a big deal? Are you muddle-headed?" The old mistress paled. "What's wrong?" Qiu Jianhan huffed and puffed, trying to calm himself down. He gritted his teeth and said, "You went to matchmake, didn't you ask if she's married? Does she have someone she likes? Is she willing? You're just going to go there like an idiot? That little bastard Qiu Yun-san likes her. So what if he likes her? If he likes you, why don't you go? If he likes Her Majesty, will you go? What a bastard you are." The old marshal spoke without thinking when he was angry, even spouting such outrageous words. The old mistress was shocked. Could it be His Majesty's? She sucked in a breath of cold air. The old marshal said angrily, "It's not His Majesty's." Just as the old mistress breathed a sigh of relief, she heard her husband say angrily, "Scarier than His Majesty's woman. Madam, you're really putting me in an unjust situation." The old mistress was dumbstruck. Scarier than His Majesty's woman? What kind of person was this? What should I do? All in all, you're not allowed to interfere in this matter. Otherwise, I won't have the face to continue living in this world other than killing myself. The old marshal sighed, his gaze filled with pity. This is so embarrassing. If Qiu Yun-san comes to the residence again, detain him. Wait for this old man to come back and deal with him. I'll go to old man Lang's residence. This time, both families are going to be humiliated. Qiu Jianhan left his words and rode out the door, heading towards Lang Daoyin's residence of the guarding general like his buttocks were on fire. The old mistress fell back into her chair, her face pale. This matter could be seen from her husband's reaction how serious it was. She did not expect herself to cause such a huge disaster unintentionally. She was filled with regret. However, she was still doubtful. What was involved? How could it make her husband so furious? On the same night, in the residence of the guarding general, Ling Daoyin was enraged, ordering his guards to summon his son-in-law over and scolding him. He had actually broken his son-in-law Zhou Zizheng's legs with his own hands. Go and spout nonsense and talk about matchmaking again. This old man will beat you to death. This old man must have been blind to marry my daughter to someone who can't do anything right, someone who only knows how to make a fool of himself. Old General Leng's rage silenced the entire residence of the guarding general. A grown man going to be a matchmaker, what a bastard. Why didn't you? The old man swallowed the latter part of his sentence, thinking that it must have been indecent. Zhou Zizheng's legs were broken, the agony was excruciating, but he gritted his teeth without making a sound. Speaking of which, Zhou Zizheng was not as bad as the old marshal had described him to be. On the contrary, he was a capable general. Otherwise, Ling Daoyin would not have agreed to marry his daughter off. Now that he had made a mistake, he was worse than dog sh*t in the old man's mouth. Qiu Jianhan went to the crown prince's residence without another word. He could tell the truth to Ling Daoyin and the latter would never divulge the secret, but the crown prince's people would not. Therefore, the old marshal barged in and said stiffly, Yun Zuiyu is this old man's adopted daughter. Her marriage is decided by this old man, your highness doesn't have to worry about it. Then, he left. His highness did not know what had happened at all, but he was already livid from the old marshal's scolding. Qiu Jianhan then went to Plethora Gem Tower. If you dare find trouble with this old man's adopted daughter again, this old man will seal this lousy tower. His words were crisp and clear. Then, when Qiu Jianhan returned to the residence, Qiu Yunsan had already been summoned by the old mistress and was being reprimanded with his head lowered. Without a word, the old man picked up a stick as thick as the mouth of a bowl and smashed it down on Qiu Yunsan's face, cursing loudly. Who do you think you are? You pester a girl just because you like her? What kind of a bastard are you? Other than King embarrassing your father, what else have you done since you were young? This old man shall beat you to death today, lest you continue to embarrass the Qiu family. Concubine. Concubine your granny's leg. The old marshal was infuriated. Seeing that the situation was not looking good, the others quickly went forward to dissuade him. As they did so, the eldest young master Qiu's head was already bleeding and he was screaming in pain. By the time the old mistress had risked her life to save her nephew, she had already been beaten 8 or 9 times. Not only was her head bleeding, her waist was almost broken. If it wasn't for the fact that her nephew had some martial arts, he would have been beaten to death by the merciless blows. The whole thing was like a farce. Hearing these things, Yun Yang's anger dissipated as well. Obviously, elders Qiu and Leng, even the crown prince, did not know about these people's families. Since the old marshal had gone berserk and even the person involved, Qiu Yunsan, had behaved himself, this matter should have passed. However, what Yun Yang did not expect was, how could this matter be so simple? Chapter 90. Early in the morning. Yun Yang leaned against the tree and breathed with all his might. The spiritual energy of the rising sun was sucked into his body like smoke. He stretched his body, crackling all over. After a long time, Yun Yang opened his mouth and a gust of white air exhaled like a dragon. It did not dissipate in the morning breeze, until it was hundreds of feet away. With a soft poof, a small hole appeared on the wall. My God! Fang Mafei and Lao Mei who had been watching were dumbstruck. Bones like thunder, Dan Tianqi like a dragon. Fang Mafei felt like he could not speak. He had cultivated to the 7th peak and had finally reached this realm. Lao Mei was already at the pinnacle of the 6th heaven but he had not reached it. As for Yun Yang, he seemed to be only at the 3rd heaven. How could something like this happen? What was going on? Both of them looked up at the sky in unison before looking at their surroundings. Nothing had changed, this was still the same world. Could it be a problem with the cultivation method? Fang Mafei and Lao Mei exchanged a look, reading the same thought in each other's eyes. Yin Yang stopped cultivating and stood up slowly to feel his body. Both Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were shocked to realize that the weakness that had been present in Yin Yang for some time had completely vanished at this moment. He was full of energy, full of vigor. Both of them were dumbfounded. He had been sickly yesterday, unable to even lift his feet, but today he was full of vigor and vigor. Yin Yang inhaled and exhaled deeply. The exhaustion from the previous period had finally been replenished today. No matter how many enemies were killed on the battlefield, the air of injustice that could be collected was minimal. Yin Yang calculated that he had burned at least 100,000 of Dongxuan's troops with a gust of wind and fire, but the air of injustice that he had collected was at most the amount of 20 to 30 people. This could be those who were especially evil. Yin Yang thought to himself. However, it was better than nothing. At least, Emmy had grown stronger. The air of vitality that it could provide was much more abundant as well. However, Yin Yang's exploitation during this period of time had made Emmy very reluctant. Their leaves drooped listlessly, and they did not even wave their vines. They looked weak and feeble. They were like a child that had been greatly wronged. They would pout every day, but they did not dare to say anything. Yin Yang's heart ached, so he tossed in 10 pieces of fine jade that he had extorted the last time. It was only then that Emmy was happy again, waving its vines and regaining its liveliness. It was even more friendly towards Yin Yang. However, Yin Yang began to worry. Out of the 50 pieces of jade, only 23 were left. This was too fast. The resources were almost depleted. Even the flood dragon pearl was already more than half empty. Although Emmy would replenish it with energy, and Emmy did not seem to be willing to let the horned dragon orb go to waste, but, after all, what could be used now was almost cleared out. The profound stones and profound crystals he won, as well as the heavenly treasures he plundered from Zhao Binglong's residence, had all been used up. Just as Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were about to congratulate Yin Yang on his breakthrough, they heard Yin Yang mumbling to himself, "I should raid another house. I can't live on if I don't raid another house next. Who should I raid?" Fang Mafei and Lao Mei staggered, almost falling to the ground. You can't live on if you don't raid other people's houses? What kind of argument was this? Old Fang, what's your cultivation base now? Yin Yang asked. 7th level, intermediate. Although the spiritual qi is accumulating every day, the improvement is not obvious. Lao Mei, how about you? 6th level, pinnacle. But it feels like the time to break through is still far away, too slow. Yin Yang frowned. Too weak. Not enough to deal with major events. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were exasperated. Yin Yang said, "You need to work harder." He sighed and returned to his room. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei could only feel a sky full of crows flying past. It was a wonderful feeling. To be told by a third peak trash that a 6th or 7th level expert's cultivation base was too weak, it felt so good. Yin Yang was frowning in his room. Saying that one's ability was not enough was not something to be said casually. Yin Zuyu's incident at Cirrus House a few days ago seemed like a farce no matter how one looked at it. It seemed to have been suppressed after Yin Yang went straight to the residence of Qiu Jianhan. However, there were some movements in recent days that made Yin Yang raise his guard. He felt goosebumps all over his body. 9 Heavens Dictum's intelligence came flying in like clouds. Mistress Qiu Jianhan is deeply ashamed. She has given up on Cirrus House and is reflecting on her mistakes behind closed doors. Qiu family's young master, Qiu Yunsan, has been injured by old Marshal Qiu Jianhan. He is grounded and reflecting on his mistakes behind closed doors. Old General Leng Daoyin has punished his son-in-law harshly and grounded him at home. No one from the residence of Leng is allowed to participate in Cirrus House's matters. Residence of Crown Prince's aide, Shui Yuehan, has been punished. His Highness apologizes to old Marshal Qiu. Keeper of Plethora Gem Tower, Fu Guansan, has gone to Cirrus House to apologize personally. It seemed that everything was fine now. Residents of Crown Prince's aide, Shui Yuehan, has been visiting Cirrus House frequently. In the name of apologizing, he has infiltrated Cirrus House continuously. He is wealthy, handsome, elegant, graceful, and his mystical skill is unfathomable. Keeper of Plethora Gem Tower, Fu Guansan, has been visiting Cirrus House frequently for the same reason as Shui Yuehan. Today, Fu Guansan and Shui Yuehan met at Cirrus House. Both of them were at loggerheads, neither giving in. Later on, provoked by words, Shui Yuehan threw out 1,000 taels of gold while Fu Guansan threw out 1,000,000 silver taels. Cirrus House has become the focal point of Tiantang City. Shui Yuehan has invited his colleagues to a banquet at Cirrus House. Fu Guansan has set up a banquet at Cirrus House, inviting wealthy merchants. Each piece of information looked so normal, but when combined with the farce that had happened some time ago, Yun Yang could smell something different. There was a creepy feeling. It was a strong premonition of impending danger. Yun Yang's expression was grim. Back then, a few days ago at Tianshan Cliff, he had been having this feeling and had even reminded his brothers to be careful. Everyone had felt the same sense of oppression. For this feeling, his brothers had led the army in a few circles and had tried various ways to test the waters, but they had still stepped into the enemy's trap. Now, this feeling had appeared again. The Four Seasons Tower. You've finally noticed it. Yin Yang's eyes gleamed coldly. You've finally made your move. Yun Zuiyu is in danger. Yin Yang paced around anxiously. Although he had always been careful in his actions, Li Changqiu and Zhao Binglong had both met with mishaps at Cirrus House. Li Changqiu had gone missing after being surrounded by the army, but the Four Seasons Tower's men would definitely know that Li Changqiu often went to Cirrus House. Therefore, after Li Changqiu's disappearance, Cirrus House had become one of their suspected targets. Yin Yang thought in his heart, Zhao Binglong, on the other hand, was beaten out of Cirrus House, then his entire family was killed. Although it happened in his own home, Cirrus House is still a suspect. 2 people consecutively are related to Cirrus House and have met with mishaps. The Four Seasons Tower has locked onto Cirrus House when there are no more obvious targets. This is also a tactic. If that's the case, Yun Yang's expression darkened. Chiu Yun-san should be a chess piece pushed by someone else, using him to test Cirrus House in the first wave. If Yun Zuiyu is taken down, then Cirrus House will naturally be gone and a thorn in their heart will be removed. If they can't take her down, then it proves that Cirrus House does have a backer and a secret. With Ling Xiaozui's words echoing here, it shouldn't be a big problem. However, they will try their best to infiltrate Cirrus House. This is a big problem for me. Perhaps they haven't thought of it yet, but they've already tested the effect. They're targeting Yun Zuiyu, so I must act. To me, this is an overt plot. No matter what, I can't watch Fifth Brother's lover being bullied. It'll be too easy to find me this way. My thunderous rage this time and old Marshal Chiu's seething anger have made them even more certain that Cirrus House has a powerful backer in Yutang's official military besides Ling Xiaozui. It's obvious that old Marshal Chiu is in the know and has become their target. Perhaps, Leng Daoyin will attract attention as well. The Four Seasons Tower's move has forced out 3 of my weaknesses. If I hadn't turned into wind and flame during the battle at the Fortress of Resilience, the Four Seasons Tower might not have acted so quickly. However, once wind and flame appeared, the Four Seasons Tower was obviously on guard. Since they couldn't find anyone, they could only strike elsewhere. That's why this happened. Yin Yang's gaze was gleaming coldly, but he did not regret his impulsiveness earlier. If he did not care when Yun Zuiyu was being bullied, then Chiu Yun-san might very well succeed. The heavy pressure of the entire military, the oppression of the Crown Prince's residence, the Chiu family, one of the 8 noble families of the martial world, and the threat of the martial world's superpower, Plethora Gem Tower, even if Yun Zuiyu really had a pinnacle expert like Ling Xiaozui behind her, it would still be difficult for her to defend herself. If that was the case, then it would truly be his lifelong regret. Even if he were to die, how could he face fifth brother Supreme Flame? Yin Yang snorted coldly. He could already feel that this inescapable net was slowly unfolding above Tiantang City, slowly descending upon them. And he was currently within the range of this large net. Since you've made your move, you have to expose yourselves. Even if Shui Yuehan and Fu Guansan aren't from the Four Seasons Tower, they're definitely related. There's also Qiu Yunsan. He could actually send old Mistress Ding and Zhou Zizheng. There must be a mysterious force behind this. These two people can't be simply ordered around. You're looking for me, but I've also made you my targets. One of the advisors in the Crown Prince's residence is from the Four Seasons Tower. What are the chances of this Shui Yuehan being one of them? Yin Yang thought quietly. Now, the enemy had made their move. It all depended on whether he could take it or not. However, his biggest shortcoming was that he was not capable enough. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei alone were definitely not the opponent's match. This was something he was absolutely certain of. The other party has only sent out those who can show themselves. Who knows how many more are watching in the dark? One careless move and we'll lose everything. Yin Yang's heart sank. I have to be extremely cautious. Extremely cautious. Chapter 91. What should I do when I can't resolve it with my own strength? Yin Yang's gaze flickered as he murmured, Dong Tianlong should have won. Why isn't he here to repay his debt? He had just thought of this. Suddenly, a voice called out from the door, Boss. Boss, are you here? This young brother is here to visit you. The voice was coquettish and cheap, with an indescribable sense of perversion. Yin Yang was stunned. The ancients were right. Tiantang people are evil. Speaking of turtles, they come, quick, come in. Yin Yang called out. He had never looked forward to this cheap man's arrival so much. Once he heard Dong Tianlong's voice, Yin Yang actually felt a little excited. Wow, resources are here. Hired thugs are here. In actual fact, Dong Tianlong had already barged in without Yin Yang's invitation, charging in with an inexplicable sense of sneakiness. Before he arrived, a double-headed Elysian lion under his robe had already rushed to Yin Yang's side, wagging its head and tail happily. Why have you changed your attire today? Yin Yang's eyes widened. I've won, why am I still wearing green? Dong Tianlong smiled proudly. It's the three of them who are green from head to toe. Yin Yang scratched his head. You've won? We've won. Dong Tianlong came forward in a fawning manner, almost prostrating himself in worship. Boss, you're a god. You're a deity who has descended to earth. Boss, my admiration for you is like the great rivers of Tianxian, the endless oceans, the majestic snowy mountains, the peerless meridians. Oh, you can no longer be described as turning stone into gold, you can even turn shit into gold. Dong Tianlong spoke with sincerity from the bottom of his heart. Boss, I love you. I love you so much that. Stop. Yin Yang felt goosebumps all over his body, chills running down his spine. His eyes were staring blankly. F***ck. These were the only words that escaped Yin Yang's mouth. Supreme Cloud had always been gentle and refined. Dong Tianlong was indeed a talent to be able to force him to utter such vulgarities. Dong Tianlong. Yin Yang looked at him in disgust. You can't be, my lord. Dong Tianlong felt like he had suffered 1,000,000 points of damage and said in a wrong tone, Dong Tianlong, am still a descendant of a noble family. How could I be like that? I like women. Yin Yang looked at him suspiciously. Really? If you don't believe me, I'll take off my pants and show you. What am I looking at? Yin Yang kicked him. How dare you disgust me like this? This is my respect for my boss. Dong Tianlong was not the least bit angry after being kicked. Instead, he felt rather honored as he said proudly, a godly person like my boss must be respected. Yin Yang held his forehead. Why did you come alone today? Where are your guards? Sigh, Dong Tianling's sorrowful sigh sent chills down Yin Yang's spine. Then, he began to complain. My lord, you don't know what kind of days I've been living these days. Dong Tianling was about to burst into tears. Ever since I won them, they wanted me to hand over the expert behind me. But what kind of person am I, Dong Tianling? I, Dong Tianling, have always been chivalrous and righteous. I give my all to my friends and I give my all to my brothers. How could I betray my friends? Dong Tianling said vehemently, that's why I wouldn't confess even if I was beaten to death. They imprisoned me and kept me under surveillance. Even when I go to the toilet, there's someone accompanying me. What kind of King day is this? Dong Tianling tried his best to gain Yin Yang's sympathy and praise, tears rolling down his cheeks. You obviously want to have it all to yourself. Yin Yang exposed him mercilessly. Dong Tianling did not feel the slightest bit embarrassed and immediately switched to a heart-to-heart mode. My lord, tell me, who in this world doesn't want to have it all to themselves? Am I right? Since we have such a great resource, why should we share it with others? Am I right? Both of us have earned so much, how great would it be to let those fellows go beg for food? When we're happy, we can toss a few copper coins at them and let them bark like a dog. That feeling, isn't it? This is the pinnacle of life. Yin Yang's expression was solemn, exasperated. This fellow only had so few pursuits in life, cut the nonsense. Yin Yang extended his arm. Where's the wager I won? Dong Tianling froze. My lord, it's meaningless to talk about money between us brothers. You don't want to give it to me? Yin Yang's expression was calm as he chuckled. Then I don't want it. Don't. Dong Tianling panicked. It was supposed to be a gift, how could his mouth be so cheap just now? I don't want it. I'll see if someone else will give it to me. My lord. I beg you. Dong Tianling knelt down decisively. I won't get up if you don't want it. How cheap. Yin Yang was speechless. I think so too. Dong Tianling was equally speechless. What else could I be if not cheap? This is not an ordinary sword, this is King cheap. So much? Yin Yang looked at the things that Dong Tianling had taken out. This time, it's a big bet. Dong Tianling chuckled, looking rather spirited. The total wager is 1,500 mystical crystals. I think this is too little, so I've taken out 500 mystical crystals myself as a token of respect to my lord. This isn't right, is it? Yin Yang looked at Dong Tianling suspiciously. What you said was 100 mystical crystals per person, a medicinal pill, a set of clothes, and a round of beatings. No matter how I calculated, it wouldn't reach 2,000 mystical crystals. Dong Tianling scratched his head. It's like this. They all wanted to raise the price due to the close time between the bets this time, wanting to win your father's bottom line in one go. So, I increased the wager. 200 mystical crystals per person, plus a marrow cleansing pill. Yin Yang coughed and rolled his eyes. These fellows had it all planned out. None of their families had the marrow cleansing pill. Even if they did, who knows when it would be distributed to them. However, my great-grandfather is the top apothecary of the 8 noble families. I have plenty of marrow cleansing pills in my family. Dong Tianling gritted his teeth one moment and then gloated the next. These fellows just wanted to trick me. I suggested a duel and the 3 of them agreed to bet with me. 200 mystical crystals per person and a marrow cleansing pill. These bastards had it all planned out. They never planned to lose, they wanted to win against me. Then, each of them would get a portion, they would get the mystical crystals and the marrow cleansing pill, and they could beat me up again. Yin Yang gritted his teeth. You agreed to such a condition, they were obviously trying to trick you? Dong Tianling looked awkward. I proposed the challenge and they gave me the conditions, how could I not agree to it? Even if I knew it was a trap, I had to jump into it. Am I supposed to say no when they said the wager right after I proposed the challenge? I can't afford to lose face like this, my lord. Yin Yang was speechless. Glancing sideways at this despicable face, he thought to himself, you can't afford to lose face like this? Where do you have any face left? Dong Tianlong was already beaming with joy. How could I not know that they wanted to trick me? But I have absolute confidence in you, my lord. If you say you can win, then you can. So I'm not afraid at all. Determined to fight, ha ha ha. Boss, you didn't see it. When these three fellows saw that they actually lost, their expressions were as if their mothers had died. Ah ha, I'm so happy. So happy that I kept patting my butt, ha ha ha. Yin Yang rolled his eyes. Don't flatter me, Dong Tianlong. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? I told you before that I would pay everything if I lost. I did, didn't I? Are you King thinking about this? Is that why you dared to take the bet? Dong Tianlong swore, boss, am I that kind of person? Look at this honest face of mine. Yin Yang snorted. Dong Tianlong was immediately embarrassed. He chuckled dryly, his eyes darting around. In actual fact, this fellow had the exact same idea. Yin Yang had said that he would pay the wager. If I lose, I'll blame it all on this child. At most, I'll just take a beating. It's not the first or second time anyway, but if I win, this is my god of fortune. Now that Yin Yang had pointed it out, he felt a little awkward. However, he had already thrown away his pride, so it was only a little awkwardness that he recovered immediately. He swore, pointing at the heavens and the earth. I can't be bothered to argue with you. Yin Yang rolled his eyes. That's still not enough. Do they have the marrow cleansing pill? These three paupers, this young master can't be bothered to force them. 300 mystical crystals for each of them. Dong Tianlong said flatteringly, boss, this isn't fake at all. Yin Yang snorted. Where are your guards? They're at the inn. I snuck out. Dong Tianlong chuckled. I've been busy these few days. The two bastards were so busy that they went to visit the one with the surname Chiu. That's why I was finally free. The one with the surname Chiu? Yin Yang was stunned. That popinjay from the Chiu family. Chiu Yun-san. What a troublemaking prodigal. Dong Tianlong was overjoyed. I went to the Cirrus house a few days ago and somehow, this fellow made a bet with someone, saying that he would win Yun Zuyu's heart within 3 months. Then, he started to pursue. In the end, he got himself into trouble. Yun Zuyu's background is very strong. Not only did Chiu Yun-san lose the bet, he was also beaten up badly by his uncle. I heard that his balls were almost crushed. He's still lying half dead in his uncle's house now. Chiu Yun-san? Cirrus house? Yun Zuyu? Yin Yang's eyes shone as he put on an excited look. There's actually such a thing? Tell me quickly. I love to hear stories of other people's misfortune the most. Yin Yang's gossipy look made Dong Tianlong feel like he had met a confidant. He slapped his thigh and said, Boss, you're my boss indeed. I love to see other people's misfortune too. Great minds think alike. Now, Yin Yang was inexplicably liking Dong Tianlong more and more. This B*TCH is despicable, but he's really my lucky star. When I'm short of resources, he sends bets. When I'm short of information, he sends it. When I'm short of fighters, it looks like it's not a problem to find a few fighters. Chapter 92. What's going on? Yin Yang was curious. I remember, isn't Yun Zuyu the Cirrus house's elder sister? How? There's something you don't know. Dong Tianlong was smug, looking like he was about to put on a show. There's a secret in this. Something's not right. He looked at Yin Yang with a sideways glance and said, Do you want to hear it? Come beg me if you do. He loved to provoke people by leaving things unsaid. I'm so sleepy. Yin Yang looked tired. I suddenly want to sleep. Dong Tianlong was dumbfounded. Big brother, why aren't you playing by the rules? You should go. Yin Yang laid down on the chair lazily and closed his eyes. Remember that I have something to do tomorrow. I'm not going. Dong Tianlong wanted to cry. Boss, you're too petty, getting angry over such a small matter. Let me tell you, boss, it's fun, I'm not listening. Yin Yang looked drowsy. I'm very sleepy. Go, don't come back anymore. I don't know you, boss. Dong Tianlong knelt down with a miserable expression. I beg you, listen to this gossip. He slapped himself regretfully. Dong Tianlong, why can't you change this cheap habit of yours? Yin Yang lifted his eyelids lazily. You're not letting me beg you anymore? I swear to God. Dong Tianlong swore solemnly. I'll never let boss beg me again. If there's one more time, let me become the god of cheap. All right, tell me then. Yin Yang sighed. This is very strange, ha ha ha. Dong Tianlong actually adjusted his emotions in an instant and was beaming with joy. Speaking of which, it's all because of me. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. Yin Yang looked at him speechlessly. Ha 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 ha. I won then. I was so happy that I treated these three bastards to Cirrus House for a drink. Dong Tianlong was excited. When we got there, I realized that it's a nice place indeed. The girls are pretty and the place is great. Elegance is most suitable for an elegant young master like me. Just as I ordered some appetizers and wine, watching the dance, someone suddenly started croaking. It sounded like a duck's voice. Dong Tianlong stretched his neck. When I heard this voice, I thought of the legendary eunuchs. I wanted to rip off his pants to take a look. Yin Yang sighed. Was there any way to listen to this? You said someone was calling out? What's that duck's voice? Are you sure it's a male duck's voice? Yin Yang noted down the characteristic of a male duck's voice. I'm absolutely sure. This fellow's name is isn't this young Master Chiu? Dong Tianlong continued, so he's looking for Chiu Yun-san. Yin Yang looked lackadaisical, but all of his attention was focused at once. He knew that this conspiracy against Cirrus House and Yun Zuyu had started from this voice. This fellow walked over with his legs crossed. Your father could smell a whiff of lust. He should be a palace eunuch. Dong Tianlong wrinkled his nose. There was a middle-aged man beside him, tall and strong. He knew Chiu Yun-san as well. Chiu Yun-san called that fellow, what, Keeper Me, King Hell. There's someone with the surname Me. Obviously, they were very familiar with each other. They had a separate table beside us. Then, I heard them start a drinking competition. After a while, the one with the surname Me started sighing, saying that he had been courting Yun Zuyu for a few years but to no avail, the pain of lovesickness and whatnot. Dong Tianlong said, I was listening from the side and thought, was it so difficult? Then, Chiu Yun-san looked down on him, saying that if he had his eyes on a girl, it would only take half a month at most. That person then said, don't brag. Forget half a month, I'd rather strip naked in Enchanting City and run from the east to the west of the city if you could get her in half a year. Yin Yang sighed when he heard this. This was a trap tailored to the temperament of these young masters of aristocratic families, especially those who were not the elites of aristocratic families. It had to be said that although it was crude, it was absolutely effective. To these young masters, their greatest joy was to gamble and play with women. Using this as a wager was exactly what they wanted. As expected, Dong Tianlong continued, we saw Chiu Yun-san's eyes light up then, saying, is this true? He's obviously tempted. Forget him, we were tempted too. King Hell, courting a woman and then watching her run around Enchanting City naked. This is King exciting. Then, that person said, young Master Chiu, this isn't a joke. I advise you not to provoke that woman. I'm afraid you won't stand a chance if you act like this. Chiu Yun-san said on the spot, if I can't get her, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Then, he forced her to clap her hands as a vow. Yin-yang sighed, speechless. Were these young masters bad people? Obviously, they were not. However, the temperament they had been nurtured since they were young made it too easy for them to fall into someone else's trap and become a weapon in someone else's hands. They used their temperament to achieve some unspeakable goal. A family, especially one that had been passed down for 1,000 years, would definitely have geniuses and elites. There would also be pillars of the family who worked hard in silence. However, there would also be popinjays like Chiu Yun-san and Dong Tianlong. It was not that they had not been educated well, it was a necessity for the family's development. When these fellows caused trouble and offended someone they shouldn't have, as long as the matter was not serious, an apology and a punishment would suffice. If the matter was too serious, they could just be thrown out to be killed without feeling the pinch. However, sometimes, when it was inconvenient for the elites to come out and cause trouble, they could use these popinjays as an excuse to flex their muscles and gain some other benefits. This was essential as well. At the end of the day, we should be reasonable when we should be reasonable, and unreasonable when we should be unreasonable. This is a way of survival. Not much explanation here, water. Then, they started to bet. Chiu Yun-san wanted to win over Yun Zuiyu within a month. Mi's persuasion eventually made it a 3-month wager. The 3 of us were witnesses and the wager was established. The 3 of us even bet 500 mystical stones each. Dong Tianlong was gloating. Yin-yang was speechless as well. You guys still bet on such a thing? Then, Chiu Yun-san started to act. Yun Zuiyu was stubborn indeed. We agreed not to use force. This fellow was like a dog biting a hedgehog, he had nowhere to bite. Dong Tianlong chuckled and said, a few days later, they met at Cirrus' house. Not only did they gain nothing, Yun Zuiyu didn't even want to see him now. She couldn't even send a message. Chiu Yun-san was at his wit's end. Mi said that such a girl deserves to be cherished. Even if he married her, it would be fine. Such a pure and self-respecting girl, it would be fine to find someone to be the matchmaker. Dong Tianlong said, this Mi fella started looking for someone to be the matchmaker, but Chiu Yun-san was reminded at this point. Hence, this fellow started looking for connections everywhere, wanting to take Yun Zuiyu as his concubine. He actually found quite a number of people. I've never realized that this Chiu Yun-san has such a strong foundation. He actually found so many important people, especially his aunt. If he didn't tell me, I really wouldn't have known that Chiu Yun-san's uncle is actually Marshal Chiu Jianhan. Dong Tianlong's expression was one of astonishment. The Chiu family's plotting is indeed profound. As Yun-yang listened, he had already deduced everything that would happen next. There was no need to continue talking about this anymore. The other party had studied Chiu Yun-san thoroughly and had pinpointed him. Step by step, they had first lured Chiu Yun-san into a trap, making it difficult for this fellow to back down. Then, they had pushed through various connections and exerted influence. From top to bottom, they had pressured Cirrus' house from all directions. Then, under the heavy pressure, Cirrus' house would be like a towel that had been soaked in water. The harder it was pressed, the more water would be squeezed out. There would come a day when all the water would be squeezed out. This was their ultimate goal. Although Chiu Yun-san had failed on the verge of success and all the pressure had disappeared, they had actually achieved half of their actual goal. At the very least, they had successfully dragged their real target, Yun-yang, into this matter and he could not extricate himself from it. As long as they continued to play tricks on Cirrus' house, Yun-yang would not be able to extricate himself. Since he could not extricate himself, there would come a day when he would be dragged out with the organization's strength and secrecy. This was an inevitable outcome. He could not watch Fifth Brother's sweetheart being bullied no matter what. Although the other party did not know this at all, however, the connection was extremely clear. From Dong Tianlong's narration, Yun-yang remembered 2 more people. One had a croaky voice and walked with his legs crossed. He could be a eunuch while the other had the surname Mi and was known as Keeper Mi. These two people must be important members of this plan. As for the assistant of the Crown Prince's residence, Shui Yuehan, and the keeper of Plethora Gem Tower, Fu Yuanshan. Yin Yang's current targets were at least 4 people. Of course, he could ask Dong Tianlong about the croaky voice and the surname Mi, but it would be too deliberate. Yin Yang rolled his eyes and was immediately displeased. Say no more, I understand now. Dong Tianlong, you keep calling me boss and second brother. You invite others to Cirrus house but you don't invite me? Dong Tianlong was talking excitedly, spittle flying everywhere when he saw Yin Yang's expression suddenly turn sour. He was taken aback. Boss, you want to go too? Yin Yang rolled his eyes. I'm not going. Why would I go if they don't invite me? My treat. Please, please. Of course. Dong Tianlong patted his chest. Shall we go now? It's too late. Yin Yang said lazily, you invited others first and I had to ask before you invited me. I can't afford to lose this face. You should go. This time, Dong Tianlong knelt down with a plop without hesitation. It's all this young brother's fault. Boss, I beg you, let me treat you to a meal. If you don't go, I won't get up. Yin Yang was exasperated. This fellow had actually summed up his experience in dealing with me. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.